The Etherian commercial station hung in the void like a crystalline jewel, its towers spiraling outward in geometric perfection that defied human comprehension. From the observation decks, the star clusters beyond appeared as rivers of light, painting the darkness with colors that had no names in Earth languages. Inside, the air itself seemed to hum with wealth, not the crude accumulation of credits, but the kind of power that shaped solar systems, that bought and sold entire civilizations before breakfast. Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down corridor 17, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly against floors so polished they reflected the ceiling like dark water. The cart's wheels needed oil. They had needed oil for 3 months, but maintenance requests from human staff were filed in a queue that might as well have been a black hole. She'd learned to ignore the sound, just as she'd learned to ignore so many things. The corridor stretched before her like a cathedral of glass and chrome, lined with the offices of beings who controlled more wealth than Earth's entire GDP. Through the transparent walls, she could see the meeting rooms where deals were struck in languages that hurt human ears, where holographic projections displayed entire trade routes, planetary acquisitions, and the casual redistribution of resources that meant life or death for billions. Maria was 43 years old. She had the kind of face that people forgot immediately, pleasant enough, worn at the edges, with dark eyes that had learned long ago not to meet anyone's gaze directly. Her uniform was the pale grey that marked all human service staff on Etherian, the colour of shadows, of things meant to blend into backgrounds, of people who existed only to clean up after their betters. Filthy human. The words came from a Vexlar passing by, its chitinous exoskeleton gleaming with the iridescent sheen of natural armour. It didn't even look at her as it spoke, merely clicked its mandibles in disgust as it stepped around her cart. The Vexlar were a middle-tier species in the galactic hierarchy, successful merchants, but not wealthy enough to occupy the upper levels. Still, they were far above humans. Everyone was far above humans. Maria said nothing. She moved her cart to the side, making herself smaller, and watched the Vexlar stride away toward the lift platforms. Its clawed feet left tiny scratches on the perfect floor. She would have to buff those out later. The scratches were always blamed on the cleaning staff, never on the creatures that made them. The station's ambient lighting shifted to the warm amber that indicated late afternoon by Galactic Standard Time. It was purely aesthetic. There was no day or night in the void, but it helped the non-human residents maintain their circadian rhythms. Humans adapted or went mad. Most adapted. Maria's shift had started 14 hours ago. It would continue for another 4. The pay was barely enough to send money back to Earth, to her sister in Sao Paulo, who was raising Maria's daughter after Maria's husband died in the mining collapse on Tau Ceti. The collapse that no one was ever charged for. The collapse that was ruled an unfortunate accident because human life had different value calculations than other species. Her daughter's name was Isabella. She was 9 years old. Maria had last held her 4 years ago, before taking this job. Before realizing that once you left Earth for work, you rarely earned enough to afford passage back. She pushed the cart forward, her hands moving with the automatic efficiency of someone who had cleaned these halls 1,000 times. Empty food containers from the Zrel species, whose digestive processes left behind a phosphorescent residue. Shed scales from the Korthan, who molted seasonally and seemed to take pride in leaving the evidence everywhere. Spilled drinks in colors that didn't exist in Earth's spectrum, staining the floors with patterns that required specialized solvents. The humans weren't allowed to use the nice solvents. Those were reserved for the automated systems that cleaned the upper levels. The humans got the cheap stuff, the industrial runoff that burned if you breathed it too long without a mask. The masks were supposed to be provided, but they'd run out last month. New supplies were on order. Always on order. Maria stopped at the entrance to Conference Room 17 Alpha. Through the transparent walls, she could see that the meeting had just ended. 4 Threxian business executives were gathering their data tablets, their silvery skin catching the light as they moved. Threxians were elegant creatures, tall and slender, with features that humans found unsettlingly beautiful. They were also notoriously messy, believing that cleaning up after oneself was beneath anyone of status. She waited until they'd filed out, each one passing without acknowledging her existence. To them, she was part of the furniture. Less than furniture. Furniture at least had aesthetic value. When the room was empty, Maria pushed her cart inside. The conference table was a masterpiece of engineering, its surface capable of displaying 3-dimensional projections, real-time data from across the galaxy, and strategic simulations complex enough to predict market trends centuries in advance. Right now it was covered in the remnants of the Threxian meal, crystallized nutrient wafers that had been chewed and spat out, cups of a thick blue liquid that smelled like copper and sage, and what appeared to be the Threxian equivalent of chewing gum, stuck directly to the table's projection surface. Maria sighed and reached for her scraper. The work was mindless, which meant her thoughts could wander. Dangerous thing, wandering thoughts. They went to places that made the eyes sting, that made the hands shake. They went to Isabella's last video message, 3 months old now because the communication fees were so expensive. Her daughter had been wearing the yellow dress, the one Maria had bought before leaving Earth. It probably didn't fit anymore. "Mommy, when are you coming home?" Maria blinked hard and focused on scraping the gum off the table. The station's public address system chimed with its characteristic 3-tone sequence. A synthesized voice spoke in Galactic Common, then repeated the message in the 12 most prevalent languages. Humans got the announcement in English because Earth had lost the linguistic diversity wars when Standard English was declared the only human language worth translating. "Attention all personnel. High-value arrival on Platform 7. All non-essential staff are to clear primary corridors immediately." Maria glanced at the time display on her cart. Platform 7 was 2 levels up. It wouldn't affect her. High-value arrivals happened every day on Etherian. The truly wealthy came and went, like gods descending from Olympus, never touching the same ground as the mortals. She finished cleaning the conference table and moved to the floors. The Threxians had tracked in something that looked like mud, but definitely wasn't. It took 3 passes with the heavy-duty cleaner before the floors were acceptable again. Through the transparent walls, she could see the station's main atrium in the distance. Even from here, the scale was breathtaking. The atrium stretched up through 20 levels. Its central column adorned with floating gardens that defied gravity, their bioluminescent flowers casting soft light in patterns that shifted like slow-motion fireworks. Water features spiraled through the air, the liquid held in place by fields that bent physics into art. Humans had built none of it. Humans had designed none of it. Humans cleaned it when it got dirty. Maria finished with Conference Room 17 Alpha and moved to the next space on her list. The routine was soothing in its way. Clean, move, repeat. Don't think too hard. Don't feel too much. Survive another day. Earn another credit. Send another message to Isabella that would arrive 3 weeks late because humanity couldn't afford the premium communication channels. She was halfway through wiping down the glass walls of an executive meditation chamber when she heard voices. Not unusual. The corridors were always full of conversation, of deal-making and gossip, and the casual cruelty that came with absolute power. But these voices were different, excited, nervous. Maria glanced up and saw a cluster of station personnel, not humans, never humans in positions of importance, gathered near the lift platform. They were looking up, toward the upper levels, and their body language radiated anticipation. A Corthan administrator was speaking rapidly into its communication device. "I don't care if the schedule has to be adjusted. Clear everything, everything. Do you understand who is arriving? Do you comprehend the magnitude?" Maria returned to her cleaning. Not her business, never her business. But the commotion grew. More personnel arriving, forming a corridor of bodies, all of them arranged in poses of respect. Some species bowed. Others performed specific gestures that indicated deference in their cultures. The air itself seemed to change, acquiring a tension that made Maria's skin prickle. The lift platform descended. Even trying not to look, Maria couldn't help but see. The being that emerged was Zathari, one of the great noble houses, a species that had reached the stars when humanity was still painting on cave walls. The Zathari were imposing by any standard, over 7 feet tall, their bodies covered in scales that shifted through deep purples and blues like oil on water. They had 4 arms, each one capable of independent complex tasks, and their faces were angular, almost crystalline in structure, with eyes that glowed with an inner light. But it wasn't just any Zathari. The assembled crowd dropped into poses of deep respect. Some actually prostrated themselves. Maria risked another glance and saw the entourage. 20 personal guards, each one armed with weapons that could level a building, advisors carrying data cores that probably contained more information than Earth's entire internet. And at the center, moving with the casual grace of someone who had never once in their life worried about anything, walked Zenthar Kixvoid. Maria knew the name. Everyone knew the name. Zenthar Kixvoid was not just wealthy. Wealth implied limits, implied something that could be counted. Zenthar's family controlled 17 solar systems. They owned the patents to 43 essential technologies that every spacefaring civilization needed. They had a private military force larger than most planetary defense fleets. When Zenthar's great-grandfather had wanted a moon moved to improve his view, he'd hired planet shapers and done it. The being passing through the corridor now was impossibly elegant. The scales seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously. 4 arms moved with perfect coordination, 2 clasped behind its back in a pose of relaxed authority, 2 hanging at its sides. The face was sharp and intelligent, the glowing eyes taking in everything with the quick assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating and acquiring, and on every finger of every hand, rings that each cost more than the GDP of a small nation. Lord Zenthar, the conference suite is prepared exactly to your specifications, one of the advisors was saying, practically trembling with the honor of being addressed. The Helivorn delegation is already waiting, and we have the contracts ready for your review. Zenthar's voice was surprisingly soft, melodious in a way that human ears found hypnotic. The Helivorn. Yes, I remember now. Something about mining rights, was it not? Yes, my lord. The entire mineral wealth of the Kelsia system, a most profitable arrangement. Profitable? Zenthar repeated, and there was something in its tone that Maria couldn't quite place. Not quite boredom, but something close. The voice of someone for whom profitable had lost all meaning long ago. The entourage passed by Maria's position. She had pressed herself against the wall, making herself as invisible as possible, her eyes down, her breathing shallow. This close, she could smell the exotic oils the Zathari used, could feel the ambient heat their bodies generated. None of them looked at her. She was a shadow cleaning a wall, less than nothing. They moved on toward the upper levels, toward the executive conference suites where the real business of the galaxy was conducted. The assembled crowd slowly dispersed, everyone returning to their duties but energized by the brief glimpse of true power. Maria waited until the corridor was clear, then resumed cleaning. Her hands were shaking. She didn't know why. She'd seen wealthy beings before. She'd cleaned up after them, scrubbed their waste, polished their floors. But something about this one had been different. The casual enormity of power, the way reality itself seemed to bend around such concentrated wealth and influence. And the eyes. For just a moment, as the entourage had passed, those glowing Zathari eyes had flickered in her direction, just for a heartbeat, just long enough for Maria to feel the weight of being truly seen and immediately dismissed as irrelevant. She finished the meditation chamber and checked her cart's inventory. Running low on the cheap floor cleaner, she'd need to requisition more, which meant paperwork that would be ignored, which meant she'd probably end up watering down what she had left, which meant the floors wouldn't get quite as clean, which meant she'd get written up for poor performance. The cycle was endless. Maria moved to the next corridor on her list, level 16, where the mid-tier trading firms had their offices. Not as pristine as the upper levels, not as desperately maintained. Here at least, the clients sometimes nodded to her in passing. Small mercies. The hours ground on. Clean, move, repeat. Her back ached. Her knees protested every time she knelt. The chemical smell of the cheap solvents had given her a headache that pulsed behind her eyes like a second heartbeat. But she kept going, because Isabella needed her to, because someone had to earn the money to keep her daughter in school, to make sure she ate, to give her a chance at a life better than this. As the shift finally drew toward its end, Maria found herself on level 17 again, near the executive suites. She wasn't supposed to be here. This level was handled by the automated systems, but her supervisor had sent her a message saying one of the conference rooms needed emergency cleaning, a spill of some kind. They needed a human to handle it, because the automated systems couldn't process organic compounds from the Zrel homeworld without malfunctioning. Always the humans for the jobs too dirty for the machines. Maria located the conference room, 17 Omega, the largest suite on the level, and approached the entrance. The doors were slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could hear voices. Lord Zenthar, the projections are quite clear. Once the Helivorn sign, the mining operations will begin within the lunar cycle. The initial extraction estimates are extraordinary. And the inhabitants of Kelsier 3? That soft, melodious voice. Zenthar. Primitive, my lord. Pre-spaceflight. Their civilization barely qualifies as industrial. Relocation will be simple. Relocation. The word hung in the air. Yes, my lord. Standard protocols. They'll be moved to the southern continent. Less mineral wealth there, but adequate for their survival. Maria knew she should leave. This wasn't for her ears. She was invisible, yes, but invisibility had limits. Listening to conversations between beings like this could get you disappeared, not fired. Disappeared. But she didn't move. How many? Zenthar asked. My lord, how many inhabitants on Kelsia 3? A pause. The sound of data being accessed. Approximately 40 million, my lord. Give or take. Give or take, Zenthar repeated softly. The relocation compensation is calculated according to Galactic Commerce Law, Section 12, subsection. I know the law. Another pause. Longer this time. Of course, my lord. The contracts are ready for your signature. The Helivorn are quite eager. They've been waiting 3 standard months for this opportunity. Maria's hands tightened on the handle of her cleaning cart. 40 million people, relocated because their world sat on valuable minerals. She'd heard stories like this before, everyone had. The galaxy was full of species that had been relocated, which was a polite word for having everything you knew destroyed, while the powerful took what they wanted. But 40 million, God. How did you even move 40 million people? Where did they go? What happened to their cities, their farms, their families? She thought of Isabella, of São Paulo, of Earth. Her planet had been lucky, in a sense. Humanity had nothing the great powers wanted. No valuable minerals, no strategic location, no unique resources. Just billions of people who were useful for cheap labor and nothing else. Maybe that was a blessing. Bring the contracts, Zenthar said finally. Let me see them. Maria heard movement inside the conference room. She should leave, right now, before someone noticed her standing here like an idiot, eavesdropping on matters that could get her killed. But her feet wouldn't move. Through the gap in the door, she could see a portion of the room. The massive table, the holographic displays showing the Kelsia system in beautiful detail. 3 planets, 2 asteroid belts, and there, the 3rd planet marked in a pulsing red that indicated resource acquisition zone. And she could see Zenthar, standing at the head of the table, all 4 arms extended, as data tablets were placed into each hand. The Zathari Lord began to read, eyes scanning the contracts with practiced efficiency. This was just business. Just another deal among thousands. Another day. Another solar system acquired. Another civilization's fate decided over documents and signatures. Maria watched those 4 hands, each one holding the power to destroy or preserve 40 million lives, and something in her chest began to burn. It wasn't anger. She'd learned long ago that anger was a luxury people like her couldn't afford. It wasn't even outrage. The galaxy was too big, too complex, too far beyond her understanding for something as simple as outrage. It was something else, something quieter and more dangerous. It was the feeling of watching something terrible about to happen and knowing, absolutely knowing, that she could do nothing about it. Zenthar lifted one of the tablets, stylus poised to sign, and Maria Santos, invisible cleaning lady, daughter of Earth, mother to Isabella, made a choice that would change everything. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her, alien eyes. Most of them. Eyes of guards, advisors, the Helivorn delegation, eyes that registered shock, then anger, then something close to disgust, that a human service worker had dared to enter this space uninvited, and 4 glowing Zathari eyes belonging to one of the wealthiest beings in the galaxy, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Security!" someone shouted. But before the guards could move, before Maria could be grabbed and dragged away and probably thrown off the station into the void, she spoke. Her voice was small, tired, human, but in the shocked silence of that moment, it carried. "Don't sign that." Zenthar's stylus froze above the tablet. The galaxy held its breath. And Maria, who had been invisible her entire life, was suddenly the most visible person in the room. Time seemed to fracture in that conference room, splitting into fragments that moved at different speeds. Maria could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. Each beat so loud, she was certain everyone in the room must hear it. The cleaning cart stood behind her like a monument to her foolishness, its squeaking wheel suddenly silent in the terrible quiet. Zenthar Kick's void remained perfectly still, the stylus hovering millimeters above the contract tablet, the 4 glowing eyes fixed on Maria with an intensity that made her want to sink through the floor. Around the table, the Helivorn delegation, 6 reptilian beings whose scales rippled with agitation, rose from their seats as one. Their translator devices began chattering in overlapping protests. "This is an outrage. How did a human get in here? Guards, remove this creature immediately." Two security guards were already moving toward Maria, their armored bulk casting shadows across the polished floor. One was Corthan, the other a species Maria didn't recognize, something with too many joints and hands that ended in what looked like biological weapons. Maria's legs wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to apologize, to back away, to return to invisibility where she belonged. Her mouth was dry, her hands trembled, but she didn't move. "Wait." The single word from Zenthar stopped everything. The guards froze mid-step. The Helivorn delegation fell silent, though their scales continued to ripple with barely contained fury. Even the air seemed to pause in its circulation. Zenthar slowly lowered all four hands, the tablets coming to rest on the table's surface. The Zathari lord's head tilted slightly, a gesture that might have indicated curiosity in a human, but could mean anything in an alien mind evolved under different stars. "You are a cleaning worker, not a question." A statement of fact, delivered in that soft, melodious voice. Maria's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Yes, my lord. You entered this room without authorization." "Yes, my lord." "You interrupted a negotiation worth approximately 700 billion credits." Maria's mind couldn't even process a number that large. It was abstract, meaningless, like trying to count stars. "Yes, my lord." One of the Helivorn delegates, the largest one, whose scales were a deep crimson shot through with gold, slammed a clawed hand against the table. "Lord Zenthar, this is intolerable. This human has no right to be here, no right to speak, no right to even look upon these proceedings. I demand she be removed and punished according to station law." The Corthan guard had produced some kind of restraint device, its energy field already crackling to life. "My lord, shall we proceed with detention?" But Zenthar raised one hand, just one, a gesture of casual authority that needed no emphasis. Everyone stopped again. "I find myself curious," the Zathari lord said, still looking at Maria with those unsettling, glowing eyes. "You told me not to sign. Why?" The question hung in the air like a physical thing. Maria felt the weight of every gaze in the room. The Helivorn delegation radiated hostility. The guards exuded menace. The various advisors and assistants who lined the walls watched with expressions ranging from shock to morbid fascination, like witnesses to an execution. Maria knew she was going to be fired. That was certain now. Best-case scenario, they'd deport her back to Earth and blacklist her from ever working off-planet again. Worst case, she'd heard stories about people who inconvenienced the truly powerful. People who simply vanished, their names erased from records, their families receiving apologetic messages about unfortunate accidents. But Isabella's face floated in her mind. Her daughter, who still believed the world could be fair, who still thought adults fixed problems, who asked in every video message, "When are you coming home, Mommy?" Maria took a breath that hurt her chest. "Because," she said, and her voice was steadier this time, 40 million people will die. The Crimson Helivorn delegate made a sound like steam escaping. "Ridiculous. The relocation protocols are fully compliant with—" "They'll die," Maria interrupted, and the shock of a human interrupting a Helivorn made the alien actually stop speaking. "Maybe not right away, maybe not all of them, but you're moving them from land they've lived on for generations to a place you've never even visited. Do you know if the soil is right for their crops? If the water is safe? If the diseases there will kill them? The surveys," one of the advisors began. "I've seen the surveys." Maria hadn't. Not really. But she'd seen enough reports in her life to know how they worked. They measure mineral content and atmospheric composition. They count resources. They don't count whether the people being moved can survive. "This is preposterous," another Helivorn said. "Lord Zenthar, the human is clearly unqualified to assess." "I'm a mother," Maria said, and something in her voice made even the Helivorn pause. "I have a daughter on Earth, 9 years old. I took this job because I needed to feed her, to keep her in school, to give her a chance at something better. I clean your floors and your toilets and your conference rooms, and I do it because that's what parents do. We survive. We adapt. We do whatever it takes." She took a step forward, not toward Zenthar exactly, but toward the holographic display that still showed the Kelsier system. The guards tensed, but Zenthar made no move to stop her. "Those 40 million people," Maria gestured at the red-marked planet. "They're doing the same thing I'm doing, trying to survive, trying to take care of their families. And you're going to take the land that feeds them, the water they drink, The places they bury their dead, and you're going to move them somewhere else because you decided the rocks under their feet are worth more than their lives. It is legal, the Crimson Hellivore said, its voice tight with controlled anger. Galactic Commerce Law, Section... I know it's legal, Maria said, and now there were tears at the corners of her eyes, though she fought to keep them from falling. That's what makes it worse. You can destroy an entire civilization and it's just business, just another contract, just another Tuesday for you. The room fell into silence again. Maria realized she was breathing hard, as if she'd been running. Her hands were shaking. She'd said too much, way too much. There was no coming back from this, but she'd said it. Someone had said it. Even if it changed nothing, even if she was dragged away and punished and never saw Isabella again, at least someone had said it. Zenthar Kixvoid remained motionless for a long moment. The four glowing eyes seemed to bore into Maria, as if the Zathari Lord was trying to see through her skin, through her bones to something deeper. Then, slowly, Zenthar turned those eyes to the Crimson Hellivore delegate. "Tell me about the southern continent," the Zathari Lord said. The Hellivore's scales rippled. "My lord, the southern continent of Kelsia III, where the inhabitants are to be relocated. Tell me about it." One of the advisors hurried forward with a data tablet. "It is adequate, my lord. Lower mineral content, but sufficient landmass. The climate surveys indicate—" "Have you been there?" The advisor froze. "My lord, you, personally, have you set foot on the southern continent of Kelsia III?" "No, my lord. But the remote surveys—" "Has anyone in this room been there?" Silence. Zenthar's scales shifted through a color Maria had never seen before, something like deep ocean water lit by bioluminescent creatures, beautiful and alien and impossible to read. 700 billion credits, the Zathari Lord said softly. "That is what this deal is worth. The mining rights alone would pay for themselves within 5 standard years. The secondary resource extraction would continue profitably for 3 centuries. It is, by any economic measure, an excellent investment." The Hellivore delegation relaxed slightly. One of them even made a sound that might have been relieved satisfaction. "And yet," Zenthar continued, "I find myself unable to sign." The room erupted. "My lord, you cannot be serious. We have been negotiating for months. The contracts are finalized. This is because of what the human said. A cleaning worker?" Zenthar raised all 4 hands this time, and the gesture carried such absolute authority that every voice cut off instantly. The Zathari Lord stood, towering over the table, scales now shifting through colors that spoke of something Maria's human eyes couldn't quite interpret, but her human heart somehow understood. It was shame. "I have," Zenthar said quietly, "signed many contracts in my life. I have acquired solar systems, redirected trade routes, dissolved civilizations, and created new ones. I have more wealth than I could spend in 1,000 lifetimes. My family name opens every door in this galaxy. I answer to no authority but my own conscience." The Lord's 4 hands moved to the tablets on the table, touching them gently, almost reverently. "And I have never," Zenthar continued, "had anyone tell me no." The glowing eyes turned back to Maria. "You are a cleaning worker. You have nothing, no wealth, no power, no status. By every measure our galaxy uses to determine worth, you are insignificant. And yet you walked into this room and told me, not to sign a contract worth more than your planet's entire economy." Maria wanted to speak but couldn't find words. Her throat was closed, her chest tight. "Why?" Zenthar asked. "You knew you would be punished. You knew you could lose everything. Why risk it?" And Maria, who had been invisible her entire life, who had learned to keep her head down and her mouth shut, who had spent years cleaning up after beings who never even saw her face, found her voice one more time, because someone had to. The words were simple, small, human, but they fell into that conference room like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread outward in ways no one could predict. Zenthar Kixvoid stood in silence for what felt like an eternity. Then, the Zathari Lord picked up the stylus, held it for a moment and set it down again. "I will not sign this contract," Zenthar said. Chaos erupted. The Hellivore delegation was on their feet, scales flashing colors that Maria's translator badge couldn't even interpret. They were shouting, threatening legal action, invoking ancient commerce treaties, demanding compensation for wasted time and resources. Zenthar listened to none of it. Instead, the Zathari Lord walked around the table, moving with that fluid grace, and approached Maria. She wanted to back away, to bow, to do something appropriate for someone in her position, but she was frozen, trapped in the moment like an insect in amber. Zenthar stopped an arm's length away and looked down at her. This close, Maria could see the intricate patterns in the scales, could smell something like ozone and spice, could feel the heat radiating from the alien body. "What is your name?" Zenthar asked. "Maria, my lord. Maria Santos." Maria Santos. The Zathari lord spoke her name carefully, as if tasting each syllable. "You have cost me 700 billion credits today." Maria's heart sank. This was it. This was where the consequences began. "I am," Zenthar continued, "in your debt." The room went silent. Even the Helivorn delegation stopped their protests, staring in disbelief. "My lord," Maria whispered. "You gave me something more valuable than credits," Zenthar said. "You gave me truth. In my entire life, surrounded by advisors and sycophants and those who tell me only what they think I wish to hear, no one has ever given me truth like that, raw and unadorned and spoken at great personal risk." One of Zenthar's 4 hands reached out, not to touch Maria but to gesture toward her, a formal acknowledgement she didn't understand but could feel the weight of. "I would like to hire you," the Zathari lord said. Maria blinked. "My lord, not as a cleaning worker, as something else. An advisor, perhaps. Someone who will tell me truth." I don't understand." Zenthar's scales shifted to something that might have been amusement. "Neither do I entirely. But I know that I have made many deals in my life, signed many contracts, and not once has anyone asked me to consider the cost beyond the credits. You did. You showed me something I had forgotten to see." The Zathari lord turned to the stunned room. "This meeting is concluded. The Helivorn may seek compensation through standard commercial channels. My legal staff will address all claims." Then to the guards, "Maria Santos is to be given full station clearance, effective immediately. Guest suite level. Send her employment contract to my personal office." "My lord," the Corthan guard said carefully, "she is a human." "I am aware. Station policy regarding human personnel will be addressed in my employment contract for her. Are we clear?" The guard bowed. Everyone bowed. Everyone except Maria, who stood there feeling like reality had shattered around her and reformed into something she didn't recognize. Zenthar looked at her one more time. "You will need time to process this, I imagine, but I am serious in my offer. Think on it. We will speak again soon." Then the Zathari lord walked out, entourage scrambling to follow, leaving behind a room full of shocked aliens and one human cleaning worker who couldn't quite believe what had just happened. The Crimson Helivorn delegate approached Maria, scales still rippling with anger. For a moment she thought it might attack her, but it simply stared at her with eyes like molten gold and said, "You have made powerful enemies today, human." Then it too left, the rest of the delegation following. Maria stood alone in the conference room, her cleaning cart still waiting by the door, its wheel ready to squeak. She looked at her hands. They were shaking harder now, adrenaline finally catching up with her actions. She'd told one of the wealthiest beings in the galaxy not to sign a contract. He'd listened. And now everything was different. Maria's communicator badge buzzed. A message from her supervisor. "Report to administration immediately. Disciplinary review pending." But underneath it, another message. This one with a priority tag she'd never seen before. "Guest Suite 47A prepared for Maria Santos. Authorization, Zenthar Kixivoid." She looked at her cleaning cart, at the cheap bottles of cleaner, at the worn handles she'd gripped for 4 years. Then she looked out the transparent walls, at the galaxy beyond, at all those stars that had always seemed so distant and cold. For the first time since leaving Earth, they looked different. They looked like possibility. Maria took a breath, straightened her grey uniform and walked out of the conference room, not toward administration, not toward her supervisor's inevitable fury, toward Guest Suite 47A. Toward whatever came next. Behind her the cleaning cart sat abandoned, its squeaking wheel finally silent. Somewhere in Sao Paulo, Isabella was probably in school right now, learning math or history or whatever 9-year-olds learned. She wouldn't know for weeks what had happened today, wouldn't know that her mother, invisible Maria Santos, had just changed the course of her life by doing the impossible, by speaking truth to power, by being, for just one moment, anything but invisible. The corridor stretched ahead, and Maria walked it with her head up, her eyes forward. And behind her in that conference room, 40 million people on Kelsier 3 continued their lives, unaware that their world had just been saved by a human cleaning lady who'd forgotten how to stay silent. Guest Suite 47A was located on a level of Etherean station that Maria had only ever seen from a distance, through transparent floors while cleaning the levels below. The lift that took her there moved so smoothly, she couldn't even feel the acceleration. And when the doors opened, she stepped into a corridor that made the executive spaces seem modest by comparison. The walls were not merely transparent. They seemed to dissolve reality itself, showing views of nebulae and star clusters that couldn't possibly be visible from the station's actual position. Holograms, Maria realized, but so perfectly rendered that her brain insisted they were real. The floor beneath her worn shoes was something soft and warm, adapting to each step, and the air smelled of things that had no name in human languages, exotic and expensive and completely alien. She felt like a stain on a pristine canvas. A service drone, sleek and silver, nothing like the battered maintenance bots that worked the lower levels, floated toward her. It projected a holographic interface that spoke in perfect English. Maria Santos, you are expected. Suite 47A is this way. Maria followed the drone, acutely aware of her grey uniform, of the chemical smell that clung to her hands despite washing them 3 times, of the fact that she was tracking her own footprints on a floor that probably cost more per square foot than her entire year's salary. The drone stopped at a door that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of obsidian threaded with veins of light. The door recognized her presence. How, she couldn't guess, and slid open silently. Maria stepped inside and forgot how to breathe. The suite was larger than the apartment in São Paulo, where Isabella lived with Maria's sister. The main room stretched out in elegant curves, its walls shifting between transparency and solid surfaces in patterns that seemed to respond to her gaze. Furniture that looked like it had grown rather than been built occupied the space with organic grace. And beyond the far wall, a view that showed the galactic core itself, burning with the light of 1 billion ancient stars. Environmental controls respond to verbal commands or biometric readings, the drone said. Sustenance can be requested through the wall interface. The suite is equipped with standard amenities adapted for human physiology, including sleeping arrangements, hygiene facilities, and communication systems. Do you require orientation? Maria couldn't find words. She just shook her head. The drone bobbed in what might have been a bow and floated away, leaving her alone in a space that felt more like a dream than reality. She walked slowly through the suite, touching nothing, afraid that any contact might shatter the illusion. The sleeping area contained a bed that looked like a cloud suspended in mid-air. The hygiene facility had a bathing pool that could have comfortably fit 5 people, with water that cycled through temperatures and somehow smelled like rain on Earth. There was a wardrobe filled with clothing in her size. How did they know her size? Ranging from casual wear to formal attire that she wouldn't have known how to put on. And everywhere that view, the stars, the nebulae, the infinite expanse of space that she'd been living in for 4 years but had never really seen, too busy cleaning floors to look up. Maria found herself standing at the main viewport, staring out at the galaxy, and the enormity of what had just happened finally crashed over her like a wave. She'd interrupted one of the most powerful beings in known space. She'd told him not to sign a contract worth more than she could comprehend. And instead of having her executed, he'd offered her a job and put her in a suite that probably cost more per night than she'd earned in her entire life. Her communicator badge buzzed again. More messages from her supervisor, each one more frantic than the last. Demands that she report immediately. Threats of termination. Warnings about station policy violations. And then a different message, this one with a priority override that wiped all the previous messages away. All concerns regarding Maria Santos are now under direct authority of Lord Zenthar Kixvoid. All previous employment contracts are void. All disciplinary actions are dismissed. All station personnel are instructed to provide full cooperation. Maria stared at the message until the words stopped making sense. The suite's communication system chimed with a soft tone that somehow managed to sound expensive. A holographic interface appeared in the air, showing a Zathari she didn't recognize, smaller than Zenthar, with scales that were a lighter purple. Maria Santos, the hologram said. I am Velta, primary aide to Lord Zenthar Kixvoid. His lordship has requested that I handle the immediate practicalities of your situation. Do you have questions? Maria had about 1,000 questions. She managed to voice one. Is this real? Velthar's scales shifted in a pattern that might have been amusement. I have asked myself the same question 3 times in the past hour. Yes, it is real. Lord Zenthar was quite clear. You are to be given accommodations appropriate to a valued consultant, full station privileges, and protection under his lordship's personal authority. I'm a cleaning worker. You were a cleaning worker. As of 1 hour ago, your previous employment contract was legally dissolved with full compensation. You are now technically unemployed. The aide paused. Though I suspect that status will not last long, Lord Zenthar intends to speak with you tomorrow morning, station time. He wishes to discuss the terms of your new position. I don't understand any of this. Join the club, as I believe humans say. Velthar's scales rippled again. However, I have worked for Lord Zenthar for 17 standard years, and I have learned that his lordship's instincts are rarely wrong. If he sees value in you, then value exists, even if neither of us fully comprehends it yet. The aide gestured, and additional holographic displays appeared, showing documents that made Maria's head spin just looking at them. In the meantime, these are your new credentials. Station access at guest executive level. Credit allocation for personal expenses. Security clearance that allows you into most non-restricted areas. And this, another document appeared, is a communication authorization that allows you unlimited contact with Earth at no cost through the premium channels. Maria's breath caught. Unlimited? Lord Zenthar was quite specific about that. He indicated that you have family you wish to contact. Isabella. Maria could call Isabella. Not send a delayed message that would arrive weeks late, but actually call her daughter in real time. Hear her voice. See her face without lag or compression. Tears came then, hot and sudden, and Maria couldn't stop them. Velthar waited patiently while she cried, the hologram simply standing there with the quiet dignity of someone who understood that sometimes emotions needed space. When Maria could speak again, she said, "Why is he doing this?" "I do not know," Velthar admitted. "But I can tell you that in 17 years of service, I have never seen Lord Zenthar look at anyone the way he looked at you in that conference room. The recordings, there were recordings. Maria Santos, there are always recordings. Every major transaction, every negotiation, every significant moment. It is standard practice." The aide's scales shifted to something more serious. "Those recordings have already spread. By now, half the station knows what happened. By tomorrow, it will be across the sector. By next week, the entire galaxy will have heard about the human cleaning worker who made Zenthar Kixvoid refuse a 700 billion credit deal." Maria felt her legs go weak. She found one of the organic-looking chairs and sat down before she fell down. "What does that mean?" "It means," Velthar said carefully, "that you have become notable. And in the galaxy we inhabit, being notable when you are human and powerless is complicated. The Helivorn delegate said I'd made enemies. The Helivorn delegate was correct. The Helivorn clan will not forgive this embarrassment. They have lost an extraordinarily profitable opportunity, and they will blame you for it, regardless of the fact that the decision was Lord Zenthar's. There will be others as well, those who see you as a threat to the established order, those who resent a human having influence, those who simply dislike change." Maria's hands were shaking again. "What have I done?" "Something remarkable," Velthar said softly, "and something dangerous. But you are under Lord Zenthar's protection now. That is not a small thing. His lordship's authority extends farther than you can imagine. While you remain under that protection, no one will dare touch you." "While I remain under it," Maria repeated. "What if that changes? Then you will need to have made yourself valuable enough that the protection continues, which is, I suspect, why Lord Zenthar wishes to employ you." The aide's hologram leaned forward slightly. "You spoke truth when no one else would. You saw something that needed to be said, and you said it, despite every rational reason not to. That is a rare quality, Maria Santos, rarer than you know." The communication system chimed again. Velthar glanced at something Maria couldn't see, and the scales shifted to a color that looked like concern. "I must attend to other matters. Lord Zenthar will contact you at 8th hour tomorrow morning, station time. Until then, I suggest you rest, eat, and perhaps contact your family. You have earned that much." The hologram began to fade, then solidified again. "One more thing. There will be a guard posted outside your suite, discreet but present, for your protection." "Do I need protection?" "I hope not, but Lord Zenthar is not taking chances with your safety. Nor should you." Then Velthar's hologram dissolved, leaving Maria alone in a suite worth more than everything she'd ever owned combined, with dangers she couldn't fully comprehend, and opportunities that terrified her more than the threats. She sat for a long time, just breathing, trying to process everything. Finally, she stood and moved to the communication console that Velthar had indicated. The interface was intuitive, responding to her touch with menus and options that made sense, even though she'd never seen them before. She navigated to the Earth communication protocols, found São Paulo in the geographic index, and entered her sister's address. The call connected instantly. No lag, no waiting, no compression artifacts. And then her sister's face appeared, life-sized and clear, looking confused and slightly alarmed because expensive real-time calls usually meant emergencies. "Maria, what's wrong? Is everything okay?" "Carmen," Maria said, and her voice broke on the name. "I need to talk to Isabella. Is she there? She's doing homework." "Maria, what's happening? Are you all right?" I don't know. Just please, let me talk to my daughter." Carmen's expression shifted from confusion to concern, but she nodded and turned away from the camera. Maria could hear voices in the background, Carmen calling for Isabella, the sound of a chair scraping, and then, "Mommy?" Isabella's face filled the screen, and Maria's heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the same instant. Her daughter had grown. Of course she had. Children grew, that's what they did, but seeing it was different. Isabella's face had lost some of its baby roundness, had begun to show hints of the woman she would become. The yellow dress was long gone, replaced by a school uniform Maria had never seen. "Hi, baby," Maria managed. "Mommy, why are you calling? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong. I wanted to see you, to hear your voice." Isabella's face brightened with that pure, unself-conscious joy that only children had. "I got an A on my math test, and Miss Ramirez said my essay about space was the best in the class. I wrote it about you, Mommy, about how you work on a space station and see all the aliens." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. When are you coming home?" The question that always came, the question that always hurt. But this time, for the first time in 4 years, Maria's answer was different. "I don't know yet, baby, but something happened today, something big. I can't explain it all right now, but things might be changing. Good changes." "Really? Really? And Isabella? I'm going to be able to call you more now, not just messages. Real calls like this whenever you want." Her daughter's eyes went wide. "Whenever I want. Whenever you want." Isabella's squeal of joy was so loud that Carmen appeared in the frame looking alarmed. "What's going on?" Maria laughed, and it felt like the first real laugh she'd had in years. "I'll explain later. For now, I got a new job. A better one. Things are going to be different." They talked for an hour. About school, about friends, about the small mundane details of Isabella's life that Maria had been missing, about everything and nothing. When they finally disconnected with promises to call again tomorrow, Maria sat in the silence of the expensive suite and cried again. But this time they were different tears. The night cycle came, another artificial construct for a station that existed outside the natural rhythms of planets, and the suite's lighting shifted to something softer, more conducive to sleep. Maria found the suspended bed, lay down on it, and discovered it was somehow more comfortable than anything she'd ever experienced, conforming to her body while supporting her perfectly. She stared up at the ceiling, which showed a view of Earth from orbit, home, small and blue and beautiful, hanging in the darkness like a promise. Tomorrow she would meet with Zenthar Kixvoid. Tomorrow she would learn what he actually wanted from her. Tomorrow the reality of her situation would fully sink in. But tonight, she'd spoken to her daughter for the first time in real time in 4 years. Tonight she slept in a bed fit for royalty instead of the cramped quarters of the lower staff levels. Tonight, she was someone the galaxy noticed. Maria closed her eyes and let the exhaustion take her, falling into sleep surrounded by luxury she didn't understand and possibilities she couldn't predict. Outside her suite, a guard stood watch, a Corthan mercenary employed by the Kixvoid family, armed and armored and under strict orders to allow no one unauthorized past the door. And in the deeper shadows of the station, in the parts where even the cleaning workers rarely went, conversations were happening. Angry conversations. Dangerous conversations. The human had upset the order of things. The human had cost powerful interests enormous sums. The human had been elevated beyond her station, and there were those who believed that such disruptions needed to be corrected, regardless of whose protection she claimed. The galaxy had noticed Maria Santos, and the galaxy, she was about to learn, could be just as cruel as it could be kind. But that would be tomorrow's problem. Tonight, for the first time in 4 years, Maria Santos dreamed of home. Maria woke to the sound of chiming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The bed was too soft, the air smelled wrong, and the ceiling showed stars that definitely weren't visible from her quarters. Then memory crashed back. The conference room. Zenthar, the impossible offer. The suite's lighting gradually increased to simulate a gentle dawn, though the actual star visible through the viewports was a white dwarf that bathed everything in harsh, cold light. The chiming continued, patient and insistent. "Yes," Maria said, her voice rough with sleep. A holographic interface materialized near the bed. Velthar's image appeared, the aide's scales cycling through colors that suggested early morning efficiency. "Good morning, Maria Santos. Lord Zenthar will see you in 1 hour. I am sending coordinates to your personal interface." Maria sat up too quickly, and the bed adjusted beneath her, keeping her balanced. 1 hour? Is that insufficient time? I can request a delay if needed. No, 1 hour is fine. Maria rubbed her face. "Velthar, what should I wear? What should I say? I don't know the protocols for—" "Be yourself," the aide interrupted gently. That is what Lord Zenthar responded to. Attempting to be something else would be counterproductive. The scales shifted to something that might have been reassurance. Wear what makes you comfortable. Speak as you did yesterday. Lord Zenthar has no patience for artifice. The hologram faded, leaving Maria alone with her racing thoughts and 59 minutes to prepare for a meeting that would determine the rest of her life. She forced herself through the morning routine. The hygiene facilities were almost too complex, with controls that adjusted water temperature, pressure, and chemical composition. She eventually found a setting marked human baseline and gratefully let the water wash away the previous day's accumulated stress. The wardrobe offered dozens of options. Maria avoided the formal attire that looked too expensive and complicated, settling instead for simple pants and a tunic in deep blue. The fabric felt impossibly soft and adjusted to her body temperature automatically. She looked at herself in the mirror, a reflective surface that appeared when she stood in front of it and vanished when she moved away, and saw a woman who still looked tired, still looked ordinary, but who was wearing clothes worth more than she'd earned in a year. The dissonance was jarring. A final chime indicated that it was time. Maria left the suite, nodding to the Corthan guard who stood with military precision outside her door. The guard's expression was unreadable behind its armored faceplate, but it inclined its head slightly in acknowledgement. The coordinates Velthar had provided led her to a private lift that required biometric identification. When she placed her hand on the scanner, half expecting it to reject her, the doors opened immediately. The lift ascended smoothly, rising past the guest levels, past the executive suites, into sections of the station she hadn't even known existed. When the doors opened again, Maria stepped into a space that redefined her understanding of wealth. This wasn't an office. It wasn't a conference room. It was something closer to a garden suspended in space itself. The chamber was vast, its walls completely transparent, showing an unobstructed 360-degree view of the cosmos. But unlike the holographic displays in her suite, this was real. She could see the subtle shift of starlight, the slow rotation of nearby celestial bodies, the deep blackness between the points of light. And throughout the space, growing in carefully cultivated beds that seemed to float in the air, were plants from 100 worlds. Maria recognized none of them. Some glowed with bioluminescence. Others moved with rhythms that had nothing to do with wind. A few seemed to be singing, producing tones that harmonized in ways that made her chest ache. At the center of it all, standing before a particularly large specimen that looked like a tree made of living crystal, was Zenthar Kixvoid. The Zathari lord wore no formal attire, no symbols of office or wealth, just a simple robe that shifted through subtle colors as the alien moved. The forearms were relaxed, 2 clasped behind the back, 2 hanging loosely at the sides. The glowing eyes were focused on the crystalline tree, studying it with an intensity that suggested deep thought. "Maria Santos," Zenthar said without turning around, "thank you for coming." "My lord." Maria wasn't sure whether to bow. She settled for standing still and trying not to touch anything. "This is a Veltarine crystal tree," Zenthar continued, still looking at the plant. "They grow on only 3 planets in the known galaxy, and they take 500 years to reach maturity. This one has been in my family for 7 generations. It is, by most standards, priceless." Maria waited, unsure where this was going. "And yet," Zenthar turned to face her, the 4 eyes fixing on her with that same unsettling intensity from yesterday. "Yesterday you valued the lives of 40 million beings I have never met, over 700 billion credits. You saw something I could not see, or perhaps something I had forgotten how to see. The Zathari Lord gestured with one hand, and a hovering platform materialized from the floor, rising smoothly to form a seat. Zenthar sat with fluid grace. Another platform appeared near Maria, clearly meant for her. She sat, feeling absurdly aware of her posture, her breathing, the fact that she was sitting in what was presumably a private garden belonging to one of the wealthiest beings in the galaxy. "Tell me about your daughter," Zenthar said. The request caught Maria off guard. "My lord? Yesterday you mentioned you have a daughter, 9 years old on Earth. Tell me about her." Maria's throat tightened. "Her name is Isabella. She's smart, really smart. Loves science, loves learning. She wants to be an engineer when she grows up, wants to design starships." A small smile. "She doesn't know how hard that is for humans. How few companies will hire us for anything beyond basic labor." "What happened to her father?" "Mining accident. Tau Ceti. The contractors didn't maintain the structural supports properly. 47 humans died. The company paid a fine and the families got a settlement that didn't even cover funeral costs." Maria heard the bitterness in her own voice and couldn't suppress it. "That's when I came here. Someone had to provide for Isabella, and my sister couldn't afford to take care of both her own children and mine, so I left." Zenthar's scales shifted through colors Maria was beginning to recognize as thoughtful consideration. "You have not seen her in 4 years." "No, my lord. The cost of transportation back to Earth is beyond my means." "Was beyond my means," she corrected, still not quite believing her new circumstances. "And yet you risk losing even this job, your only means of supporting her, to tell me not to sign a contract." Maria met those glowing eyes. "I couldn't not say something. Those people on Kelsia 3, they have families too. They have daughters and sons and lives that matter. I know what it's like to have everything taken away. I couldn't just stand there and watch it happen to someone else, even if it cost you everything." Even then, Zenthar stood and walked to another plant, this one with leaves that seemed to be made of flowing water, somehow held in solid form. One hand reached out to touch the plant gently, and it pulsed with light in response. "I was born into wealth that defies comprehension," the Zathari Lord said quietly. "My family has controlled resources for 17 generations. I have lived a life where every desire is fulfilled before I can even fully articulate it, where every door opens, every voice agrees, every contract is signed." Zenthar turned back to Maria. "Do you know what that does to a person? That level of insulation from consequence? From disagreement? From truth? No, my lord, it makes you forget. Forget that there are costs beyond credits. Forget that your decisions affect lives you never see. Forget that power comes with responsibility, not just privilege." The scales shifted to something darker, more troubled. "Yesterday, in that conference room, I was about to sign a contract that would have displaced 40 million people, and I knew this. The data was in the reports, but they were just numbers, just statistics in a document. They had no faces, no names, no daughters who wanted to be engineers." The Zathari Lord moved closer to Maria, and she fought the urge to back away from the sheer presence of the being. "You made them real," Zenthar said. "With a few words, you made me see what I had been avoiding. And I realized something in that moment. I realized I had become exactly what I had always despised, someone who treated lives as line items in a ledger. My lord, I didn't mean to." "You meant exactly what you said. That is your value, Maria Santos. You speak truth without calculation, without regard for what is convenient or profitable or politic. You see what needs to be said and you say it, even when every rational instinct tells you to remain silent." Zenthar's forearms moved in a gesture that Maria's translator badge identified as a formal declaration of intent. "I need someone like you. My empire, my family, my entire existence is surrounded by people who tell me what I wish to hear, advisors who present me with opportunities without fully explaining the costs, associates who care only about profit, subordinates who fear disagreement. You want me to, what, disagree with you? I want you to tell me truth, to be the voice that asks the questions everyone else is too afraid to voice, to make me see the things that wealth and power have blinded me to." The glowing eyes softened slightly. "I want you to be what you were yesterday, someone who cares more about what is right than what is safe." Maria sat in silence, processing this. Finally she said, "My lord, I'm not qualified for this. I'm a cleaning worker. I have no education in business or diplomacy or galactic law. I don't know how your world works. I'll embarrass you. I'll make mistakes." "Undoubtedly," Zenthar agreed. You will say things that are inappropriate. You will offend people who are accustomed to deference. You will question decisions that have already been made. And all of that is exactly what I need. Why? The question hung in the air. Zenthar moved to the transparent wall and gazed out at the stars. Because I am tired, the Zathari Lord said softly. Tired of being surrounded by artifice. Tired of wealth that has lost all meaning. Tired of power that insulates me from reality. You offered me something yesterday that no amount of credits can buy. Genuine concern for consequences. Not strategic concern, not calculated concern. Just humanity. Maria felt something twist in her chest at the word. My lord, I'm not special. Any decent person would have done the same thing. And yet, Zenthar turned back to face her, you were the only one in that room who did. Not because you are special, perhaps, but because you have not forgotten what it means to struggle, to sacrifice, to care about someone beyond yourself. The Zathari Lord returned to the hovering seat and fixed Maria with that intense gaze. I am offering you a position as my personal advisor. You will accompany me to negotiations, meetings, and deliberations. You will be granted access to information and decisions that affect billions of lives. And your job, your only job, will be to tell me when I'm about to make a mistake, to be the voice of those who have no voice in these matters. The compensation will be substantial, more than substantial. You will be able to bring your daughter here if you wish, or visit her regularly. You will have resources to ensure she receives the best education available, and you will have my protection, which in this galaxy is worth more than any amount of credits. Maria's mind was spinning. My lord, people will hate me for this. The Hellivorn already do. Others will see me as an upstart, a human who has risen above her station. I'll be a target. Yes, Zenthar acknowledged. You will face opposition, resentment, and likely danger. This is not a safe position I am offering, but it is an important one. The scales shifted to something that might have been respect. You proved yesterday that you are willing to face danger for what you believe is right. I am asking you to continue doing so, but with resources and protection to help you survive the consequences. And if I refuse, then you will still have my gratitude and my protection. You will be given enough resources to return to Earth, to be with your daughter, to live comfortably for the rest of your days. I will not force this upon you, Maria Santos, but I hope you will accept. Maria thought of Isabella, of her daughter's face on the screen last night, bright with joy at the prospect of more calls. Of the future Maria had always wanted for her, but never thought possible. She thought of the people on Kelsia 3, who would never know they had been saved by a cleaning lady's moment of courage. She thought of her husband, dead in a mine, because human lives were cheaper than proper maintenance. And she thought of what Zenthar had said, about being the voice for those who had no voice. If I do this, Maria said slowly, I need to know something. Yesterday when I told you not to sign, what made you listen? Really, why did you stop? Zenthar's scales rippled through several colors before settling on something that looked almost vulnerable. Because in that moment, when you spoke, I heard something I had not heard in a very long time. I heard someone speak without wanting anything from me, without calculation or agenda or ulterior motive. You had everything to lose and nothing to gain, and yet you spoke anyway. The Zathari Lord leaned forward slightly. In my entire life I have been surrounded by people who want something from me. Wealth, status, favor, opportunity. But you wanted me to not do something, to give up profit for the sake of beings you would never meet. And in that moment I realized how rare that was, how precious. You reminded me, Zenthar continued, that there are things more important than credits. You reminded me that I have a choice. To be someone who accumulates wealth without regard for cost, or to be someone who uses power responsibly. You gave me that choice, and I chose. Maria felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. I'm terrified, she admitted. I don't know if I can do this, if I'm strong enough or smart enough or anything enough. Neither do I, Zenthar said, and the honesty in those words was somehow comforting. But I am willing to find out. The question is whether you are. Maria sat in that impossible garden, surrounded by plants from 100 worlds, in the presence of a being whose wealth could buy solar systems, and thought about her daughter, about truth, about the voice for the voiceless, and about the cleaning lady from Earth who had somehow found herself at the center of something larger than she could comprehend. Okay, she said finally, I'll do it. I'll be your advisor. I'll tell you truth even when it's uncomfortable. I'll be the voice you asked for. Zenthar's scales shifted to something that looked like relief, and satisfaction combined. Then we have an accord. Velthar will handle the formalities, contracts, credentials, security arrangements. You will begin immediately. Begin with what? We have a meeting in 2 hours with the Solarian Trade Consortium. They wish to discuss resource extraction from their home system. I want you there. Maria's stomach dropped. 2 hours? My lord, I don't know anything about the Solarians or trade consortiums or resource extraction. Good, Zenthar interrupted. Then you will ask the questions that need asking without being constrained by what you are supposed to already know. Come prepared with honesty, Maria Santos. That is all I require. The Zathari lord stood, indicating the meeting was concluded. But before Maria could rise, Zenthar added one more thing. You changed my life yesterday. Whether you meant to or not, whether you understand it or not, you altered the course of everything. I intend to honor that change by being worthy of the choice you asked me to make. I hope you will help me continue to do so. Maria stood on shaking legs and bowed, not because protocol demanded it, but because respect required it. I'll do my best, my lord. I know you will. That is why you are here. Maria left the garden, descended in the private lift and returned to her suite in a daze. Velthar's hologram was already waiting with contracts to review, security protocols to learn, and a schedule that would begin in less than 2 hours. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just a cleaning lady. She was Maria Santos, advisor to one of the wealthiest beings in the galaxy. And the galaxy she was about to discover was paying very close attention to what happened next. The conference room was smaller than the one where Maria had confronted Zenthar, but no less intimidating. The walls displayed a slowly rotating hologram of the Solarian home system. 7 planets orbiting a yellow star, with trade routes marked in glowing lines that connected to dozens of other systems. Data streams flowed along the edges of the display, showing resource projections, population densities, and economic forecasts that scrolled too fast for Maria to read. She sat 3 seats to Zenthar's right, positioned deliberately between 2 of the Zathari Lord's senior advisors. Both of them had acknowledged her presence with the bare minimum of courtesy before proceeding to ignore her completely. Their scales spoke volumes even when their voices didn't, colors that cycled through subtle shades of disdain and confusion. Across the table sat the Solarian delegation. Solarians were a species Maria had only seen in passing, tall and slender, with skin that looked like polished copper threaded with veins of gold. They had 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on their elongated faces, and their movements were precise and economical, as if they'd calculated the energy cost of every gesture. The lead negotiator, who had introduced herself as Coordinator Shelvar, was speaking in a voice that somehow managed to sound both melodious and coldly efficient. Lord Zenthar, our proposal is straightforward. The asteroid belt in our outer system contains rare earth elements valued at approximately 3 trillion credits. We lack the infrastructure to extract them ourselves, and the initial capital investment would strain our economy. Your family has both the resources and the expertise. I am familiar with the basic structure, Zenthar replied, 2 of his 4 hands resting on the table while the other 2 manipulated data tablets. You seek a partnership arrangement rather than outright sale of extraction rights. Correct. We propose a 60-40 split, with your family retaining 60% of all extracted resources in exchange for providing the infrastructure, expertise, and initial capital. One of Zenthar's advisors, a Zathari named Corvel, whose scales were a darker purple than Zenthar's, leaned forward. The projections show a return on investment within 8 standard years, highly favorable by current market standards. Maria watched the exchange, trying to follow the technical language. Much of it was beyond her understanding. Complex economic terminology, legal structures that made no sense, references to galactic commerce regulations she'd never heard of. She felt like a child sitting at an adult's table, pretending to understand conversations that were clearly beyond her. But Zenthar had asked her to be here, had told her to ask questions that needed asking. So she listened and she watched, and she tried to see what wasn't being said. The Solarians presented their data with impressive precision: population growth curves, environmental impact studies, economic sustainability models. Everything looked perfect on paper, a profitable arrangement for both parties, minimal risk, substantial gain, and yet something about it made Maria's instincts prickle. She couldn't explain it, couldn't point to a specific number or claim that seemed wrong, but there was something in the way Coordinator Shelvar spoke, a certain carefully controlled urgency beneath the professional demeanor. The way the other Solarian delegates occasionally exchanged glances that lasted just a fraction too long. The presentation continued for another 20 minutes. Corvel and the other advisor asked technical questions about extraction rates, processing capabilities, and market volatility. The Solarians answered with prepared data, their responses smooth and rehearsed. Finally, Zenthar raised one hand and everyone fell silent. The Zathari Lord's glowing eyes moved across the holographic displays, then to the Solarian delegation, then, briefly, to Maria. "The proposal is sound," Zenthar said. "The numbers support the projections. However, I find myself wondering about timeline. You mentioned that initial capital investment would strain your economy. Yet the asteroid belt has been known to your species for centuries. Why approach me now rather than 10 years ago, or 10 years from now?" It was a subtle question, delivered in Zenthar's characteristically soft voice. But Maria saw the Solarian delegates stiffen slightly, their copper skin darkening just a shade. "We believe," Shelvar said carefully, "that current market conditions are optimal for this arrangement." "That does not answer my question." A pause. Then Shelvar's three eyes focused entirely on Zenthar, with an intensity that bordered on desperate. "Lord Zenthar, I will be direct. Our economy is not merely strained, it is failing. We have 10 standard years, perhaps less, before systemic collapse. The asteroid resources represent our only viable path to recovery, but we cannot access them without external support. Every year we delay makes the situation worse." The admission hung in the air like a confession. One of the other Solarian delegates made a sound that might have been dismay, but Shelvar silenced them with a gesture. "We need this partnership," the coordinator continued. "Not as a profitable opportunity, but as survival. If we cannot secure the resources in the asteroid belt, our civilization will decline past the point of recovery. We will join the list of species that failed to adapt, that fell from prominence into obscurity." Corvel's scales shifted to something calculating. "This changes the negotiation parameters substantially. If your need is so acute, then the profit split should reflect the disparity in bargaining positions. 70-30 would be more appropriate. That would leave us insufficient resources for economic recovery. Then perhaps 75-25, with a provision that once your economy stabilizes, the split can be renegotiated." Maria watched the color drain from the Solarian skin. She didn't need a translator to read the despair in their postures. They were drowning, reaching for a lifeline, and the response was to make the lifeline shorter. She thought about the Tauceti mine, about contractors who chose profit over safety, about her husband, crushed under rock because someone had decided that human lives weren't worth the cost of proper maintenance. She thought about 40 million people on Kelsia 3 who would have been relocated because minerals mattered more than homes, and she thought about what Zenthar had hired her to do. "Wait," Maria said. Every head in the room turned toward her. Corvel's scales flashed with annoyance. The Solarians looked confused, and Zenthar's glowing eyes fixed on her with that familiar intensity. "Maria Santos," the Zathari Lord said quietly, "you have something to say." It wasn't a question. It was permission. Maria took a breath that hurt her chest. "I'm sorry, I know I don't understand all the technical details, but I need to ask something. Coordinator Shelvar, when you say your economy is failing, what does that actually mean? For your people, I mean, not the numbers. What does it look like on the ground?" Shelvar's three eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture Maria's translator identified as surprise. "I do not understand the question. You said you have 10 years before systemic collapse. What happens to your people during those 10 years? And what happens if the collapse comes?" The coordinator was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, "Starvation begins in the outer settlements first. We have already seen this starting. Infrastructure failures follow: power grids, water purification, medical facilities. Within 5 years, we project a 20% population loss. Within 10, 50% or more. Not from war or plague, but from the slow dissolution of the systems that keep a civilization functioning." Maria felt sick. "How many people live in your system? 9 billion? 400 million. The number was too large to comprehend. Maria's mind tried to picture it and failed. 9 billion. If 50% died, that would be, God, 4.5 billion people. 4.5 billion Isabellas, mothers, fathers, children. 4.5 billion lives. And if you take this deal," Maria said, looking at Corvel now, "with a 70-30 split or 75-25, can you save them? Can you rebuild fast enough?" Shelvar's voice was barely audible. No, the margins would be insufficient. We would slow the decline perhaps, but not reverse it. So better terms don't matter, Maria said. You're not negotiating for profit. You're negotiating for survival, and the only terms that matter are terms that actually give you a chance to survive. Corvel's scales flashed with irritation. Miss Santos, with all due respect, this is a business negotiation. Emotional considerations are the only considerations that matter, Maria interrupted, and was shocked by the firmness in her own voice. She turned to Zenthar. My lord, you hired me to tell you truth, so here's truth. This isn't just a business deal. It's a rescue, and we're sitting here discussing how to profit from their desperation. We are providing resources they cannot access themselves, Corvel argued. That service has value. Of course it does, Maria agreed. But what's the value of 9 billion lives? How do you calculate that? How do you look at people who are facing extinction and think, how can I maximize my return on investment? She looked around the table at the Zathari advisors, whose scales were now cycling, through colors that might have been anger or shock, at the Silurians who were staring at her with something that looked like desperate hope. I know I'm just a human, Maria continued. I know I don't understand galactic commerce or profit margins or any of the sophisticated economics that govern these decisions, but I understand what it's like to be desperate. I understand what it's like to need help and have someone decide that helping you isn't worth their time unless they profit enough from it. She met Zenthar's glowing gaze. You asked me yesterday why I risked everything to tell you not to sign that contract. This is why. Because someone has to remember that behind every number, every percentage, every credit value, there are people, real people with families and dreams and lives that matter. The conference room was absolutely silent. Maria could hear her own heartbeat, could feel sweat on her palms despite the climate control. Then Zenthar spoke, voice soft but carrying absolute authority. Coordinator Shelvar, what terms would you need? Not what you hope for or expect, but what would actually give your civilization a genuine chance at recovery? Shelvar's 3 eyes widened. My lord, answer the question. The coordinator looked at her fellow delegates, then back at Zenthar. An even split, 50-50. With infrastructure support during the first 5 years of extraction and processing, that would give us sufficient resources to stabilize our economy and begin rebuilding. And if I offered you 60-40 in your favor? The Silurians actually gasped. Corvel made a sound of protest that Zenthar silenced with a gesture. My lord, Shelvar said, voice shaking, that would be extraordinary, more than generous. It would not only save our civilization, but allow us to rebuild stronger than before. But I do not understand. Why would you? Because, Zenthar interrupted, my advisor has reminded me of something I should not have needed reminding of. Profit without purpose is meaningless. Wealth without responsibility is hollow. And if I cannot use my resources to genuinely help those who need it, then what exactly is the point of having such resources? The Zathari lord stood, all 4 hands moving in a formal gesture. I propose a partnership with a 60-40 split in favor of the Silurian government. My family will provide full infrastructure support for the first 10 years of operation, not 5. And we will include provisions for technology transfer, so that eventually your species can manage the extraction independently. My lord, Corvel's scales were now definitely showing anger. This is fiscally irresponsible. The return on investment will be minimal, and the technology transfer provisions eliminate our long-term advantage. I know exactly what it eliminates, Zenthar said calmly. It eliminates the opportunity to exploit another species' desperation. It eliminates the chance to profit from their weakness, and I find that I am comfortable with both eliminations. The Zathari lord looked at Maria again, and something in those glowing eyes made her chest tight. My advisor asked what the value of 9 billion lives is. I cannot calculate that in credits, but I can choose whether to value profit over people, and I find that I no longer wish to make that choice. Not when better choices are available. Zenthar turned back to the Silurians. Do you accept these terms? Shelvar was crying. Maria hadn't known Silurians could cry, but the coordinator's 3 eyes were streaming with fluid that caught the light like liquid gold. Yes, yes, my lord. On behalf of my entire species, we accept. You have saved us. You have literally saved our civilization. Thank Maria Santos when you thank anyone, Zenthar said. She is the one who saw what needed to be seen. The meeting concluded quickly after that. The Silurians were too overwhelmed to discuss details, which Zenthar delegated to support staff with instructions to be generous with timelines and flexible with terms. Corvell left the room radiating fury, his scales dark with suppressed anger. The other advisor followed, looking confused and uncertain. Maria sat in the emptying conference room, shaking with the aftershocks of adrenaline. She'd just influenced a deal that would affect billions of lives. She, Maria Santos, former cleaning lady, had helped determine the fate of an entire civilization. The weight of it was crushing. Zenthar remained seated, 2 hands on the table, 2 clasped behind his back. "That was well done," the Zathari lord said quietly. "I think I just made your advisors hate me." "You did. Corvell especially. He will likely resign within the week." Zenthar's scales shifted to something that might have been amusement. "He has been with me for 12 years, and in that time he has never once questioned whether a profitable deal should be made, only how to make it more profitable. I'm sorry. Do not be. You did exactly what I hired you to do. You reminded me, reminded everyone in this room that economics is not an abstract exercise, that behind every negotiation are real people with real lives. You made us see them." Zenthar stood and moved to the holographic display of the Solarian system. "Do you know what the most dangerous thing about wealth is, Maria Santos? It distances you from consequence. You make decisions that affect billions, but you never see the faces of those billions, never hear their voices, never know their names. They become numbers in a database, resources to be managed, variables in an equation." The Zathari lord touched the hologram, and it zoomed in on the second planet, the Solarian homeworld, blue and green and beautiful. "But you saw them. Even without being told, even without data, you knew instinctively that this was not just a business opportunity. This was life and death, and you refused to let us forget that. My lord, Corvell was right about one thing. The deal you just made is not optimal, not for your profit." "No," Zenthar agreed. "By conventional standards, it is a terrible deal. I will make a fraction of what I could have made, and I do not care." The glowing eyes turned to Maria. "I have more wealth than I can ever use, more resources than most species can imagine. What I lack, what I have been lacking for most of my life, is purpose, meaning, the sense that my existence contributes something beyond accumulation. You gave me that today. You gave me a choice between profit and principle, and you made me see which one actually mattered. For that alone, you have earned everything I am paying you and more." Maria stood on shaking legs. "I don't know if I can do this, my lord. Every time, for every deal, I don't know if I'm strong enough." "Neither do I," Zenthar said honestly. "But we will find out together. And in the meantime, you have saved 9 billion lives today. That is not a small thing, Maria Santos." They left the conference room together. As they walked through the corridors, Maria noticed something that made her stomach clench. People were staring, not just glancing, staring. Some with curiosity, some with respect, some with undisguised hostility. Word had spread fast. The human advisor, the cleaning lady who had influenced a deal worth trillions, the woman who had the ear of Zenthar, Kixvoid. She was visible now, truly visible. And visibility, Maria was beginning to understand, came with a price she had not yet fully paid. The assassination attempt came 3 days later. Maria was returning to her suite after another meeting, this one about mining regulations in the Outer Rim territories, where she'd asked uncomfortable questions about worker safety standards that had made half the room hostile and the other half thoughtful. She was exhausted, her head spinning with technical terminology she barely understood, and thinking about calling Isabella before bed. The corridor on level 47 was quieter than usual. She should have noticed that. Should have realized that the normally bustling executive level shouldn't be this empty at this hour. But she was tired, distracted, thinking about her daughter's latest message about a science project on atmospheric processes. She didn't see the figure step out of the side passage until it was almost too late. Almost. The Corthan guard assigned to shadow her, a veteran named Kreltor, who took his duties with almost religious seriousness, moved faster than Maria's eyes could track. One moment he was 3 steps behind her, the next he was between her and the attacker, his weapon drawn and firing in a single fluid motion. The blast of energy lit up the corridor like lightning. The attacker, Maria caught a glimpse of chitinous armor, Vexillar maybe, stumbled backward, shield generators flaring as they absorbed the hit. "Run!" Kreltor shouted at Maria, but her legs wouldn't move. She was frozen, watching as the attacker recovered and returned fire. The energy bolts carved scorch marks into the walls, melted sections of the beautiful decorative panels, filled the air with the smell of ozone and burning polymer. More guards appeared, she didn't know from where, and the attacker realized they were outnumbered. The figure retreated down the corridor, moving with desperate speed, and was gone before anyone could give chase. Kreltor turned to Maria, his armored bulk somehow managing to convey concern despite the faceplate. "Are you injured?" Maria realized she was shaking. No, I'm fine. Come, we need to get you to secure location, now." He led her not to her suite, but to a different room, one that looked like it had been designed as a panic shelter. Thick walls, no windows, security systems that hummed with barely contained power. 2 more guards stood watch outside while Kreltor sealed the door and ran diagnostic scans to ensure the space was secure. "What happened?" Maria managed when she could speak without her voice shaking. "Assassination attempt," Kreltor said bluntly. "Professional by the look of it. They knew your route, knew your schedule. This was planned. But who? We will determine that. For now you stay here until Lord Zenthar arrives. He has been notified." Maria sank into one of the chairs that lined the wall. Her hands were still trembling. Someone had just tried to kill her. Actually kill her. This wasn't a threat or a warning. That had been a weapon designed to end her life, and only Kreltor's reflexes had prevented it. She thought of Isabella, of what would have happened if the attack had succeeded. Her daughter would have received a message. "Your mother died in an incident on Etherian Station," and that would have been it. No body to bury, no closure, just another human who had vanished in the vast machinery of the galaxy. The door opened 15 minutes later, and Zenthar entered with an entourage that included Velthar and several security personnel Maria didn't recognize. The Zathari Lord's scales were cycling through colors that Maria had learned to associate with anger, deep reds and blacks that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Maria," Zenthar said, and there was something in the voice that made her chest tight. Not just concern, but something deeper. "Are you harmed?" "No, my lord." Kreltor stopped them. Zenthar turned to the guard. "You have my gratitude. Your vigilance likely saved her life." Kreltor bowed deeply. "Only doing my duty, my lord. And you have done it well. I will see that you are appropriately rewarded." Then, to the security personnel, "What have we learned?" One of them, a species Maria didn't recognize with features like carved stone, stepped forward. The attacker was Vexelar, hired professional. "We tracked their escape route to a maintenance shaft that leads to the lower commercial districts. They are likely off station by now, but we recovered this from the site." The security officer held up a small device that looked like a data chip. "Payment authorization, traced to an account registered to a Helivorn shell corporation. We are pursuing the connection, but it will take time to penetrate their legal structures." "The Helivorn," Maria whispered, "because of the Kelsier contract." "Almost certainly," Velthar confirmed. "The loss of that deal cost them enormous prestige as well as profit. They blame you for the embarrassment." "But I didn't make the decision. Lord Zenthar did. And Lord Zenthar is protected by wealth, power, and legal frameworks that make him effectively untouchable," the aide explained. "You, however, are vulnerable. Killing you sends a message that interfering with Helivorn interests has consequences. And it provides them with a measure of revenge." Maria felt sick. "So they'll try again." "Undoubtedly," Zenthar said, "unless we make it clear that attempting to harm you carries consequences they are unwilling to face." The Zathari Lord's scales shifted to something darker, more dangerous. "Velthar, send a message to the Helivorn clan leadership. Make it clear that Maria Santos is under my direct protection, and any further attempts on her life will be considered an attack on the Kixvoid family itself. Include language about economic sanctions, legal action, and, should they persist, direct military response." Velthar's own scales shifted with what might have been satisfaction. "That will be an expensive message for them to receive, my lord." "Good. Let the cost be proportional to their offense." Zenthar moved closer to Maria, and she could feel the heat radiating from the alien body. "I am sorry this has happened. I knew there would be risks when I hired you, but I did not anticipate them manifesting so quickly or so violently. My lord, maybe I should step down if my presence is causing this much trouble." "No." The word was sharp, brooking no argument. "That is exactly what they want. To make you afraid, to make you quit, to prove that humans can be intimidated back into insignificance. I will not allow it. You will not allow it." "But Isabella, your daughter will be protected. I am already making arrangements to have her brought here if you wish, with your sister as well if that is your preference. They will be given accommodations, security, everything needed to keep them safe." Maria's throat was tight. "You do that? I would do considerably more than that. Maria, you have become valuable to me, not just as an advisor, but as—" I struggle to find the correct word in human language. As a conscience, perhaps. As a reminder of principles I had forgotten. I will not lose you to assassins hired by those who resent being told no. Zenthar straightened, all four arms moving in a gesture of formal declaration. "From this moment, your security detail is tripled. You will not go anywhere unguarded. Your suite will be relocated to a more secure level, and your family will be brought to the station under full protection." "My lord, this is too much. It is not enough." The glowing eyes fixed on her with an intensity that was almost painful. "3 days ago, you helped save 9 billion Solarian lives. Yesterday you questioned labor practices that would have endangered thousands of workers. This morning, you asked about environmental protocols that the entire council was trying to ignore. You are doing the work I hired you to do, and you are doing it brilliantly. The fact that this makes you a target is not a reason to stop. It is a reason to ensure you are protected well enough to continue." Maria wanted to argue, wanted to say this was too dangerous, too much responsibility, too far beyond what she'd ever imagined for herself. But she thought of those 9 billion Solarians, of the workers whose safety standards she'd questioned, of all the future decisions where her voice might make a difference, and she thought of Isabella, who wanted to be an engineer, who believed her mother was brave and strong and could change things. "Okay," Maria said quietly, "I'll continue. But my lord, what if next time I'm wrong? What if I question something I shouldn't, or push back on a deal that's actually good, or—" "Then we will learn from the mistake and do better next time," Zenthar interrupted. "Maria, I do not expect you to be perfect. I expect you to be honest. Those are very different things." The Zathari lord moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. "In the morning, we have another meeting. The Cathari Collective wishes to discuss a trade agreement that seems innocuous on its surface. I want you there. I want you to see what I cannot see, to ask what I would not think to ask. And if someone tries to kill me again, then Kreltor and his team will stop them again, and I will make whoever sent them regret that decision for the rest of their existence, however long or short I decide that should be." There was something in Zenthar's voice that made the threat very real, very credible. This was not the soft-spoken philosopher discussing the value of life. This was the being whose family had controlled 17 solar systems for generations, who had power that could crush civilizations if applied with intent. Maria realized, perhaps for the first time, exactly how dangerous her protector could be when motivated. After Zenthar left, Kreltor remained with her, while the room was prepared for her to sleep there, too risky to return to her suite until it could be fully secured and swept for additional threats. Someone brought her personal items, including her communication device. She called Isabella despite the late hour on the station. The call connected to São Paulo in the middle of the afternoon, and her daughter's face appeared, bright with surprise and joy. "Mommy, twice in 1 week," Maria smiled despite everything. "Hi, baby, I wanted to hear your voice. Are you okay? You look tired." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just working hard." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Isabella, how would you like to come visit me on the station?" Her daughter's eyes went wide. "Really? Could I? Could I really come to space? Really? You and Aunt Carmen both. We'd have a place to stay, and you'd be safe, and you could see where Mommy works. When can we come?" "Soon, baby, very soon. I'm making arrangements now." They talked for 30 minutes, Isabella's excitement so pure and complete that it made Maria's chest ache. When they finally disconnected, she sat in the secure room, surrounded by guards and security systems and the machinery of protection that wealth could buy, and felt the weight of her choice settle onto her shoulders. She'd become visible. She'd spoken truth. She'd influenced decisions that affected billions, and now someone had tried to kill her for it. But Isabella was coming. Her daughter would see the stars, would experience the galaxy beyond Earth, would have opportunities Maria had never dreamed of. That had to be worth the risk, didn't it? Maria lay down on the temporary bed that had been prepared and stared at the ceiling, thinking about truth and consequences, about power and responsibility, about the price one paid for refusing to be silent. Outside the secure room, Kreltor stood watch with absolute dedication, his weapon charged and ready, his senses attuned to any threat. And somewhere in the vast station, in the shadows where deals were made, and power was exercised, and the galaxy's machinery ground on, people were talking about the human woman who had the ear of Zenthar Kixvoid, some with respect, some with curiosity, some with fear, and some with the cold calculation of those who had decided she needed to be removed, regardless of whose protection she claimed. The next attempt, they knew, would have to be more subtle, more certain, more final, but that would take planning, resources, time. And in that time, Maria Santos would continue to do what she'd been hired to do: speak truth to power, ask uncomfortable questions, and remind the galaxy's elite that behind every number were people whose lives mattered. It was dangerous work. It was essential work. And she was just beginning to understand how much the galaxy needed someone willing to do it, even if it cost her everything. Isabella arrived on Etherian Station 3 weeks later, and Maria cried the moment she saw her daughter step off the transport vessel. She'd grown. God, she'd grown so much in 4 years. The little girl Maria had left behind had become something between child and adolescent, taller and leaner, with her father's eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. She wore new clothes, practical travel wear that Maria's sister Carmen must have bought for the journey, and carried a small bag clutched against her chest. When Isabella saw Maria, her composure shattered. She dropped the bag and ran, and Maria caught her daughter and held on like she'd never let go. "Mommy," Isabella sobbed into Maria's shoulder. "Mommy, I missed you so much." "I missed you too, baby. So much. Every single day." They stood there in the arrival bay, surrounded by other travelers and station personnel and the constant flow of galactic commerce, and none of it mattered. Nothing mattered except her daughter's arms around her neck and the solid reality of her presence. Carmen appeared a moment later, looking overwhelmed and exhausted from the journey. Maria's sister was 3 years older, with grey already streaking her dark hair despite being only 46. She'd aged in the 4 years Maria had been gone, bearing the weight of raising 2 children alone while working 2 jobs. Maria released Isabella long enough to embrace her sister. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." "You owe me about 1,000,000 explanations," Carmen replied, but there was no anger in it, just bewildered affection. "Maria, what is happening? The people who came to get us, they had documents signed by some lord. They arranged everything. They treated us like we were important. I'll explain everything, I promise. But first, let me show you where you'll be staying." The accommodations Zenthar had arranged were in a residential section Maria hadn't even known existed, a level designed for families of high-status personnel, with suites that could have housed 20 people comfortably. The walls could be adjusted to show any view, from Earth landscapes to alien vistas. The furniture adapted to human proportions automatically, and the amenities included everything from educational interfaces to entertainment systems, to a small garden where actual earth plants grew under carefully calibrated lighting. Isabella's eyes were the size of dinner plates. "We get to stay here? This whole place?" "This whole place," Maria confirmed. "It's bigger than our apartment. It's bigger than our whole building." Carmen was walking through the space with an expression that cycled between awe and disbelief. "Maria, how can you possibly afford this? What exactly are you doing now?" "I'm an advisor," Maria said, "to Lord Zenthar Kixvoid. He's one of the wealthiest beings in the galaxy." "An advisor?" Carmen turned to look at her sister. "You were a cleaning lady. What are you advising about?" "Truth," Maria said simply. "He hired me to tell him truth when no one else will." She explained it all while Isabella explored the suite with the boundless energy of a 9-year-old discovering a new world. She told Carmen about the Kelsier contract, about the Solarian deal, about the assassination attempt that had prompted the urgent arrangements to bring them to the station. Her sister's face went pale. "Someone tried to kill you. Someone succeeded in trying. They didn't succeed in killing. There's a difference." Maria tried to make it sound lighter than it was. "I have guards now, protection. Zenthar takes my safety very seriously." "Maria, this is insane. You're playing games with beings who control solar systems. What happens when you say the wrong thing, when you anger the wrong person? Then I deal with the consequences, but Carmen, someone has to do this. Someone has to be the voice for people who don't have one, and somehow, impossibly, I ended up being that person." Her sister sat down heavily on one of the adaptive chairs. "I don't know whether to be terrified for you or proud of you." "Be both," Maria suggested. "I am." Isabella returned from her exploration, her face glowing with excitement. "Mommy, there's a whole room just for learning. It has interfaces that can teach you anything, and the bathroom has a tub that's practically a pool, and the bedroom has a window that shows the galaxy." Maria pulled her daughter close. "Do you like it, baby?" "Like it? Mommy, it's amazing. This is where you live. This is your life now." "This is where we live," Maria corrected, "all three of us, for as long as we want." The next few days were a blur of adjustment. Isabella needed to be enrolled in the station's educational systems, which, it turned out, were far more advanced than anything available on Earth. Carmen needed to find her footing in an environment where she was simultaneously intimidated and fascinated by everything she encountered. And Maria had to balance her duties as Zenthar's advisor with being present for her family. It was Zenthar himself who solved one of the immediate problems. The Zathari Lord requested a meeting not in a conference room or garden, but in Maria's residential suite. He arrived with minimal entourage, just Velthar and 2 guards, and stood at the entrance with a formality that seemed almost nervous. "I apologize for the intrusion," Zenthar said, "but I wish to meet your family if that would be acceptable." Isabella, who had been doing homework on the learning interface, looked up and froze. She'd seen aliens before. The station was full of them, but Zenthar was something else entirely. The sheer presence, the subtle display of wealth and power in every movement, the forearms and glowing eyes that marked him as fundamentally other. Maria moved to her daughter's side. "Isabella, this is Lord Zenthar Kiksvoid. He's my employer. My lord, this is my daughter Isabella Santos." Zenthar moved with careful slowness, lowering himself to bring his eyes closer to Isabella's level. "Hello, Isabella Santos. Your mother has told me about you. She says you wish to be an engineer." Isabella found her voice small but brave. "Yes, sir, my lord. I want to design starships. A noble aspiration. The galaxy needs good engineers, especially human engineers. Your species has a talent for finding creative solutions to complex problems." The glowing eyes shifted to Carmen. "And you must be Carmen. Maria has spoken of you with great affection and gratitude." Carmen, to her credit, managed a respectful nod despite her obvious nervousness. "My lord, thank you for all of this, for bringing us here, for keeping my sister safe. It is I who should thank you. You cared for Isabella when Maria could not. You sacrificed so that she could work here. That debt is not easily repaid, but I hope these accommodations are a start." Zenthar straightened and turned to Maria. "I have a proposal. Carmen, you work 2 jobs on Earth, yes? Retail and food service?" "Yes, my lord. Both positions that require managing complex systems, dealing with difficult customers, and maintaining operations under stress. These are valuable skills. I would like to offer you employment with my household staff, not as a servant, as a coordinator, someone who manages the practical details of daily operations. The position would pay well and allow you to be close to your family." Carmen's eyes widened. "My lord, I have no training in managing alien households. I don't know the protocols, the customs. You will learn. And more importantly, you will bring a human perspective to operations that have never had one. Maria has shown me the value of that perspective. I suspect you would do the same in your own way." He turned back to Isabella. "And for you, young one, I have arranged something special. The station has an engineering apprenticeship program designed for promising students who show aptitude. It is normally restricted to species with established technical expertise, but I have convinced the administrators to make an exception. If you are interested, you could begin learning the fundamentals of starship design from some of the best engineers in this sector." Isabella looked like someone had just offered her the galaxy itself. "Really? I could really do that? If your mother approves, and if you work hard. The program is demanding, but I suspect you are equal to the challenge." Maria felt tears threatening again. "My lord, this is too much. You're already doing so much for us. I am doing what any decent employer should do, ensuring that valued personnel have the support they need to succeed. Maria, you cannot focus on your duties if you are worried about your family's welfare. This is as much practical as it is generous." But Maria saw through the carefully pragmatic words to the truth beneath. Zenthar was not just being practical. The Zathari Lord was being kind in the only way someone of such wealth and power knew how, by providing resources, opportunities, security, by treating her family as if they mattered. The next weeks settled into a pattern that felt almost dreamlike in its surreality. Maria attended meetings with Zenthar, asking her uncomfortable questions and speaking truths that made powerful beings squirm. Carmen began her new position and discovered she had a talent for managing complex logistics that translated surprisingly well to alien operations. And Isabella threw herself into the engineering program with the fierce determination of a child who had been given a glimpse of her dreams made real. In the evenings, they would gather in their suite and share stories about their days. Isabella would excitedly explain the principles of faster-than-light propulsion or the structural integrity requirements for hulls that could withstand gravitic shear. Carmen would describe the challenge of coordinating between species whose concepts of time and space were fundamentally different from human norms, and Maria would talk about the negotiations and deals, though she was careful to leave out the more dangerous aspects. She didn't tell them about the second assassination attempt, which had been thwarted before it even reached her, or the third, which had resulted in 3 would-be assassins being arrested by station security and deported with stern warnings about what happened to those who threatened the Kicksvoid family's interests. She didn't tell them about the hate messages she received daily, the threats, the species who refused to deal with Zenthar because he employed a human advisor. She definitely didn't tell them about the nightmares where Kreltor wasn't fast enough, where the energy bolt found its mark, where she died alone in a corridor while Isabella grew up without a mother again. But there were good things too, unexpected things. One morning, Maria arrived at a meeting to find a small group of humans waiting outside the conference room. They were station personnel, mechanics, technicians, service workers, and they looked nervous but determined. Their spokesperson, a woman named Chen who worked in environmental systems, stepped forward. "Miss Santos, we wanted to thank you. We've heard what you've been doing, how you've been speaking up about worker safety, about fair treatment, about all of it. Things are changing, slowly but changing. Management is actually listening to concerns because they're afraid you'll hear about problems and bring them to Lord Zenthar." Another worker, a young man named Kofi, added, "You've given us a voice. Just by existing, by being in those rooms, you've made it so we can't be completely ignored anymore. That matters. That matters more than you know." Maria didn't know what to say. She'd been focused on the big decisions, the billion credit deals and civilization-level negotiations. She hadn't realized that her presence was having smaller, more personal effects. "I'm just doing my job," she managed. "You're doing more than that," Chen said quietly. "You're changing what's possible for humans in this galaxy. Our children are going to have opportunities we never had because you proved we could contribute something other than cheap labor." After they left, Maria stood in the corridor for a long moment, processing. Velthar found her there and observed her with those unreadable alien eyes. "You did not expect this," the aide said. "No, I was trying to help with the big things, the important decisions. And you did not realize that the big things are made of many small things, that changing how one powerful being sees humans changes how others see humans. That visibility creates opportunity, even when it also creates danger." Maria thought of Isabella, studying engineering with some of the best minds in the sector, of Carmen, managing operations and earning respect from species who had never taken humans seriously, of the workers who suddenly had a voice because someone in power was willing to listen. "It's a lot of responsibility," she said quietly. "Yes," Velthar agreed, "but you carry it well, better than many who were born to such responsibility." That evening, Maria sat with Isabella while her daughter worked on a design project, a theoretical propulsion system that could achieve faster acceleration with better fuel efficiency. The mathematics were beyond Maria's understanding, but she watched her daughter's face bright with concentration and joy, and felt something settle in her chest. This was why she'd risked everything, why she continued to risk everything, not for herself, for this, for Isabella's chance to be more than a statistic, for Carmen's opportunity to use her skills meaningfully, for all the human workers who might have better lives because someone finally gave them a voice. "Mommy?" Isabella looked up from her work. "Are you okay? You look sad." "I'm not sad, baby. I'm really proud of you. I'm proud of you too. Everyone in my classes talks about you, about how you work with Lord Zenthar and help make important decisions. Some of the alien students didn't believe a human could do that, but then they asked their parents and found out it's true." Isabella smiled with uncomplicated pride. "My mom is kind of famous." Maria pulled her daughter into a hug. "My daughter is going to be an amazing engineer. Maybe we'll both be amazing," Isabella suggested. "Yeah," Maria agreed, her voice thick. "Maybe we will." Outside their suite, Kreltor stood watch with his usual vigilance. The Corthan guard had become almost part of their family, joining them occasionally for meals, telling stories about his homeworld, teaching Isabella self-defense techniques that the girl found endlessly fascinating. The galaxy was still dangerous. The threats were still real. But here, in this moment, with her daughter in her arms and her sister humming in the kitchen and the stars visible through the windows, Maria felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate hope of survival, but the genuine hope of possibility, of futures that could be better, of lives that could matter beyond merely enduring. She'd been invisible once. A cleaning lady in grey uniform, scrubbing floors in corridors where no one saw her. Now she was visible. Dangerously, impossibly visible. And that visibility was changing things in ways she was only beginning to understand. The galaxy was watching Maria Santos, some with admiration, some with hatred, some with calculation. But she was no longer alone in the spotlight. She had her family. She had protection. She had purpose. And she had the stubborn determination of a mother who had already sacrificed everything once and refused to let that sacrifice be wasted. Whatever came next, she would face it. Not alone, not powerless, not invisible. She would face it as herself, Maria Santos, human, mother, truth-teller, and the woman who had made the galaxy remember that every life mattered, even hers. 6 months after Maria had first walked into that conference room and changed her life forever, the Galactic Commerce Council called an emergency session. The council was the closest thing the galaxy had to a central authority. Representatives from 200 species gathered to establish trade regulations, resolve disputes, and maintain the economic order that kept civilization functioning. It met rarely, only when something threatened the fundamental structure of galactic commerce. And apparently, Maria Santos was that threat. Zenthar received the formal summons on a morning that had started peacefully. Maria had been having breakfast with Isabella, helping her daughter review calculations for an engineering exam, when Velthar appeared in their suite with an urgency that made Maria's stomach drop. "Lord Zenthar requires your immediate presence," the aide said. "The council has issued a formal challenge to your employment. They are calling it a violation of established precedent and requesting that your position be reviewed." Maria's hands went cold. "What does that mean?" "It means," Velthar said carefully, "that the council wishes to determine whether your influence on Lord Zenthar constitutes improper interference in galactic commerce. They are using language about maintaining established hierarchies, preventing unqualified input in critical decisions, and protecting the integrity of negotiation processes." Isabella looked up from her datapad, her face suddenly worried. "Are they trying to fire Mommy?" "They are trying to do something considerably more complex than that," Velthar replied. "But yes, that is the fundamental goal." Maria kissed her daughter's forehead. "I'll be back soon, baby. Don't worry." But she was worried, deeply worried. As she followed Velthar to Zenthar's private office, her mind raced through implications. If the council ruled against her employment, what would that mean? Would she lose her position? Would she and her family be deported from the station? Would all the progress, all the changes she'd helped create, simply evaporate? Zenthar was waiting in the crystal garden, surrounded by plants from 100 worlds, but the Zathari Lord's scales were cycling, through colors Maria had never seen before, something between fury and calculation and steely determination. "They are afraid of you," Zenthar said without preamble. "The council, the major trading houses, the established powers, they have watched you influence decisions for half a standard year, and they see their carefully maintained order being disrupted. My lord, I never meant to. I know. That is part of what frightens them. You do not seek power for yourself. You simply speak truth, and truth is the most dangerous weapon in a galaxy built on convenient fictions." Zenthar moved to the transparent wall, looking out at the stars. "The council session is in 3 days. They will present their case, that your employment represents a dangerous precedent, that allowing humans to influence high-level decisions undermines established protocols, that my family's decisions have become erratic and unpredictable." "Have they?" Maria asked quietly. "Become erratic?" "By conventional standards, yes, I have refused profitable deals on ethical grounds. I have prioritized long-term humanitarian considerations over short-term profit. I have questioned practices that have been standard for centuries, all because you asked me to see what I had been ignoring." The Zathari Lord turned back to face her. "I do not regret a single decision, but the council has a point. I am no longer behaving as someone in my position is expected to behave, and that makes me unpredictable. Unpredictable entities are dangerous to the established order. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to come to the council session, to speak for yourself, to show them exactly why your voice matters." Zenthar's scales shifted to something fierce, almost predatory. "And I want you to remind them that humans are not simply cheap labor to be exploited and dismissed, that your species has value beyond what they have been willing to acknowledge." Maria felt her pulse quicken. "My lord, I'm not a diplomat. I don't know council protocols. I'll embarrass you. You will be yourself. That is all I ask. All I have ever asked." The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Velthar tried to brief her on council procedures, but the complexity made her head spin. Carmen worried openly, and Isabella tried to hide her fear behind forced optimism. Kreltor increased security protocols, and Maria could feel the tension in every corridor, every glance from station personnel who knew something significant was happening. On the morning of the council session, Maria dressed in formal attire that Zenthar's staff had provided, elegant but simple, designed to show respect without pretending to be something she wasn't. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a woman who still looked tired, still looked ordinary, but who carried herself differently than she had 6 months ago. She looked like someone who mattered. The council chamber was overwhelming in scale. It occupied an entire level of the station, a circular space large enough to hold thousands. The walls were lined with viewing platforms where representatives from 200 species sat in positions of importance. And at the center, a raised dais where the most powerful voices in galactic commerce would decide her fate. Maria walked in flanked by Zenthar on one side and Kreltor on the other. Every eye in the chamber tracked her movement. She could feel the weight of their attention: curiosity, hostility, fascination, contempt. She was being judged before a single word was spoken. The council chair, a Threxian whose silver skin seemed to glow with an inner light, stood at the central podium. "We convened this emergency session to address a matter of significant precedent. Lord Zenthar Kixvoid, of the Zathari noble house, has employed a human in a position of advisory authority. This employment has allegedly influenced numerous high-level decisions, including the refusal of the Kelsier extraction contract, the unusually favorable terms of the Silurian partnership, and several other transactions that deviate from established norms." The chair's eyes fixed on Maria. "The council must determine whether this employment represents improper influence, whether it violates protocols regarding species-appropriate roles, and whether it sets a dangerous precedent for galactic commerce." A Helivorn delegate stood, not the crimson one from before, but another with scales of deep emerald. "The human in question has no formal education in economics, no training in galactic law, no certification in any field relevant to the decisions she has influenced. Yet she has the ear of one of the galaxy's wealthiest beings, and her primitive emotional responses have cost legitimate business interests trillions of credits." "Primitive emotional responses," Maria repeated softly, and the words carried through the chamber's perfect acoustics. The Helivorn delegate turned to her with undisguised contempt. "You stopped the Kelsier contract because you felt sorry for the inhabitants. You influenced the Solarian deal because their desperation moved you. You question labor practices because you project your own species' weaknesses onto others. These are not rational bases for commerce." Maria felt Zenthar's presence beside her, solid and supportive. She took a breath and stepped forward to the speaker's position that had been designated for her. "You're right," she said, and her voice was steady despite her racing heart. "I have no formal education, no training, no certifications. I was a cleaning lady. I scrubbed your floors and cleaned your waste, and was invisible to most of you for 4 years before Lord Zenthar hired me." She looked around the chamber, meeting alien eyes that ranged from hostile to curious. "But I do have something. I have experience being powerless. I know what it's like to be at the mercy of people who make decisions without seeing the faces of those affected. I know what it's like to be a number in a report, a statistic in a projection, a life that doesn't matter because it's not profitable enough to matter. And yes, when I saw 40 million people about to be displaced for mining profits, I felt sorry for them. I felt sorry because I could imagine being one of them, because I could picture my daughter being one of them, because I'm not so far removed from struggle that I've forgotten what it feels like." A Corthan representative stood. "Emotion clouds judgment. Commerce requires rational analysis, not sentiment." "Does it?" Maria challenged. "Because from where I stand, rational analysis without any emotional consideration leads to the Tau Ceti mining disaster that killed my husband and 46 other humans because proper safety equipment wasn't profitable enough to install. It leads to species being relocated with no concern for whether they can survive the relocation. It leads to a galaxy where profit is the only value that matters, and lives are just numbers on a balance sheet." She could feel the chamber's attention intensifying. Some of the representatives were leaning forward now, actually listening. Lord Zenthar hired me to tell him truth, not economic truth or legal truth or diplomatic truth, just human truth. The truth of what his decisions actually mean for the people they affect. And yes, sometimes that truth is emotional. Sometimes it's messy and complicated and not easily calculated, but that doesn't make it less true. The Emerald Hellivore was on its feet again. You speak of truth, but you are fundamentally unqualified to assess complex economic situations. Your input is based on ignorance and feeling, not knowledge and reason. Maybe, Maria acknowledged, but I've noticed something in the past 6 months. Every time I've asked an uncomfortable question, every time I've pushed back on a decision, the real experts have been able to answer me if the decision was actually sound. They've been able to explain why the safeguards are sufficient, why the terms are fair, why the consequences are acceptable. But when they can't answer my questions, when they get defensive or angry or dismissive, that's usually when we discover that the decision wasn't as sound as everyone thought, that someone was cutting corners or overlooking problems or prioritizing profit over safety in ways that weren't immediately obvious. Maria looked directly at Zenthar, then back to the council. I'm not trying to make economic decisions. I'm trying to make sure the people making those decisions are actually seeing all the costs, not just the ones that show up on profit projections. And apparently that's threatening enough that 200 species feel the need to convene an emergency session to stop me. The council chair raised a hand for silence as murmurs rippled through the chamber. Lord Zenthar, you have remained silent during this discussion. What is your position on this matter? Zenthar stood, and the sheer presence of the Zathari Lord seemed to fill the chamber. My position is simple. I will employ whom I wish in whatever capacity I choose, for whatever reasons I find sufficient. The Kixvoid family answers to no authority but our own conscience. That said, Zenthar continued, scales shifting through colors that commanded attention, I will explain my reasoning, not because I owe this council an explanation, but because the matter deserves clarity. 6 months ago, I was surrounded by advisors who told me only what I wished to hear. Every deal was profitable. Every decision was sound. Every contract maximized return on investment. I was wealthy, powerful, and completely insulated from the consequences of my choices. Then a human cleaning lady walked into a conference room and told me not to sign a contract. She had no authority to do so. No business being there, no qualification beyond basic human decency. And she did it anyway, knowing it could cost her everything. The Zathari Lord's eyes found Maria in the chamber. She reminded me that behind every contract are lives, that wealth without responsibility is meaningless, that power without conscience is monstrous. She gave me something no amount of credits could buy, perspective I had lost, humanity I had forgotten, choices I had stopped making. Since hiring her, I have refused deals that were profitable but unethical. I have offered terms that were generous but fair. I have questioned practices that were legal but unconscionable. And my family's wealth has not diminished. Our influence has not waned. Our power has not eroded. If anything, Zenthar said, and there was steel in the soft voice, our reputation has grown. We are no longer seen as simply accumulating wealth. We are seen as exercising power with consideration for its consequences, and that reputation is worth more than any contract Maria has ever questioned. A new voice spoke from the viewing platforms, a Solarian representative that Maria recognized as Coordinator Shelvar. The Solarian people would like to speak on this matter. The council chair looked surprised, but gestured permission. The floor recognizes the Solarian delegation. Shelvar descended to the speaking floor, her 3 eyes fixed on Maria with unmistakable gratitude. 6 months ago, my civilization was dying. We came to Lord Zenthar seeking terms that would allow our 9 billion people to survive. We were desperate, and the initial negotiations reflected that desperation. But then, Maria Santos asked a question, a simple question. What terms would actually allow us to survive, not just delay our collapse? And Lord Zenthar changed the deal, not because it was more profitable for him, but because it gave us a genuine chance at recovery. The Solarian coordinator's voice grew stronger. Today our economy is stabilizing, our people are eating, our infrastructure is being rebuilt. In another year we will be self-sufficient again. In 5 years we will be thriving. None of that would have happened without Maria Santos. So, when this council asks whether she is qualified, whether her influence is proper, whether her employment sets a dangerous precedent, I ask this in return. Qualified by what standard? Proper according to whose rules? Dangerous to whom? Shelvar looked around the chamber. She is qualified by the standard of actually caring whether her decisions kill people. She is proper according to the rules of basic decency, and she is dangerous only to those who profit from others' suffering. Other voices began to rise. A human worker representative, speaking for the thousands of station personnel whose conditions had improved because Maria had questioned safety protocols. A minor trade official who had nearly signed a predatory contract until Maria's questions had exposed hidden costs. Species after species, some Maria recognized, some she didn't, speaking about how her influence had changed something for the better. Not everyone. The Helivorn remained hostile. Several major trading houses clearly resented her. There were plenty in the chamber who saw her as a threat to their interests, but there were also plenty who didn't, and that balance was shifting. Finally, the council chair raised both hands for silence. This session has provided a considerable perspective. However, the fundamental question remains, the precedent of allowing humans, a species generally restricted to service and labor roles, to influence high-level commerce decisions. If we permit this, what prevents other species from demanding similar privileges? Nothing, Maria said, and the chamber went silent again. Nothing should prevent it. If there are other species being restricted to roles that don't match their capabilities, if there are other voices that need to be heard, then maybe this precedent is exactly what the galaxy needs. She looked around the chamber one more time. I'm not special, I'm really not. I'm just a woman who got tired of being invisible, who spoke up when she saw something wrong, and who got extraordinarily lucky that someone listened. But there are millions like me. Billions, maybe. People with perspectives and insights and truths that never get heard because the galaxy has decided they're not important enough to listen to. So yes, I'm a dangerous precedent, because if I can be heard, then maybe others can too. And maybe that will change things. Maybe that will make the galaxy a little less convenient for those at the top, but a little more survivable for everyone else. And personally, Maria finished, I think that's a trade worth making. The council deliberated for 4 hours. Maria waited with Zenthar in a private chamber, too nervous to eat, too wired to sit still. Isabella had sent her 3 messages, each one trying to sound encouraging but clearly worried. Carmen had sent one, just, I love you, be brave. When the council finally recalled them, Maria's legs were shaking as she walked back into the chamber. The council chair stood at the central podium, expression unreadable. The Galactic Commerce Council has considered the matter of Maria Santos's employment with Lord Zenthar Kixavoid. After extensive deliberation, we have reached a decision. Maria held her breath. The council finds that while Miss Santos's employment represents an unprecedented situation, it does not constitute a violation of any established law or regulation. Lord Zenthar's right to employ advisors of his choosing is absolute, and the council has no authority to restrict that choice. Relief flooded through Maria, but the chair wasn't finished. Furthermore, the council acknowledges that the questions raised by Miss Santos's presence merit consideration. We hereby establish a new position, cultural liaison officers, to be filled by species traditionally underrepresented in high-level commerce discussions. These officers will serve as voices for perspectives that may otherwise be overlooked. The chair's eyes found Maria. Miss Santos, you are hereby offered the first such position, with full council recognition and authority. Your role would be to serve as an independent voice in commerce negotiations, representing not just Lord Zenthar's interests, but those of underrepresented species throughout the galaxy. Maria's mind was reeling. They were offering her an even more powerful position. My lord? She looked at Zenthar. The Zathari lord's scales were shifting through colors that might have been pride. The choice is yours, Maria Santos. You could take this position and have even greater influence, or you could remain as my personal advisor, with the guarantee that your employment is now protected by council precedent. Or, Zenthar added softly, you could choose something else entirely. You have earned the right to decide your own path. Maria looked around the chamber, at the representatives who had spoken for her, at the ones who still clearly resented her, at Shelvar, whose people she had helped save, at the workers who had found their voice through hers. She thought of Isabella, studying engineering and dreaming of starships, of Carmen thriving in her new role, of the life they had built here, precarious and dangerous and impossible, but real. I'd like to remain Lord Zenthar's advisor, Maria said finally, with one condition. Name it, the Zathari Lord said. I want to mentor the other cultural liaison officers, help them find their voices, teach them what I've learned about asking uncomfortable questions, Because I'm not special, remember? If I can do this, others can too. And they should. Xanthar's scales shifted to something warm. Agreed. The council chair struck the ceremonial gong that ended formal sessions. The matter is resolved. Maria Santos's employment is officially recognized and protected by council precedent. This session is concluded. As the chamber emptied, Maria stood in the center of it all, trying to process what had just happened. She'd come here expecting to be dismissed, possibly deported, certainly humiliated. Instead, she'd been validated, protected, given even more influence than before. Xanthar approached, and for the first time the Zathari lord bowed to her, a formal gesture of deep respect. You have changed the galaxy today, Maria Santos. That is not an exaggeration. You have literally changed what is possible. We changed it, Maria corrected. I just asked questions. You're the one who chose to listen. And that choice, Xanthar said softly, has proven to be the most valuable decision I have ever made. They left the council chamber together, and Maria immediately called Isabella. Her daughter's face appeared on the comm screen, bright with relief and pride. Mommy, everyone's talking about what happened. You won. We won, Maria said. All of us. Your mum just got to be the one standing up there. That night, Maria stood at the viewport in their suite, looking out at the galaxy that had seemed so cold and hostile when she first arrived. Isabella was asleep, dreaming of starships. Carmen was reviewing schedules for the next day's coordination tasks. Kreltor stood watch outside, as always, faithful and vigilant. And Maria thought about the journey that had brought her here, from invisible cleaning lady to the woman who had changed galactic commerce, from powerless to powerful, from silent to heard. It had started with 3 words. Don't sign that. 3 words that had cost her everything she knew and given her everything she'd never imagined. She thought about all the people whose lives had changed because she'd found the courage to speak. The Kelsiorians who still had their homes, the Solarians who had survived, the workers who had better conditions, the future officers who would carry forward the work she'd started. And she thought about her husband, buried on Tau Ceti, who had died because human lives didn't matter enough to someone making economic decisions. She hoped he would be proud, hoped he would understand that she'd tried to make sure others didn't face the same casual disregard. I'm not invisible anymore, she whispered to the stars. None of us are. Behind her, Isabella stirred in her sleep and smiled, dreaming of engineering marvels she would someday create. And across the galaxy, in chambers of power and corridors of wealth, people were talking about Maria Santos, the human who had changed everything, the cleaning lady who had reminded the powerful that every life mattered, the voice that had refused to be silent, and in that refusal had given voice to millions who had waited in silence for someone, anyone, to finally see them, to finally care, to finally choose compassion over profit, humanity over convenience, truth over comfortable lies. Maria Santos had started as nothing, as invisible as humans were invisible throughout the galaxy, but she had ended as something the galaxy would never forget, proof that one voice speaking truth at the right moment could change everything, and she was just getting started. The end.